and they're all going to need to move about. To walk, cycle, drive, bus, tram, train, use shared vehicles, and whatever technology emerges next. Smart, effective transport is vital. So Moreland Council has plans to help keep us moving now and into the future. Our road network is already congested and more cars will only make that worse. We need to limit the number of additional cars travelling and parking around our city if we want to keep our quality of life or make it better. Building wider or more roads isn't the answer. There just isn't land available without immense cost. The answer is in making other forms of transport more attractive, practical, accessible and available. We're lucky. Parts of Moreland are rich with transport options. In these areas, there are more opportunities to change the way we move around, and we're working to create even more transport options for everyone throughout Moreland. We're going to give more space to pedestrians and cyclists and work with the state government to improve public transport. We want residents who move into new housing that's close to public transport and shopping areas to bring fewer cars with them. We're encouraging this by allowing fewer spaces within these new buildings and continuing to limit access to on-street parking permits for these new residences. This will only happen in activity centres and not in other parts of the city. Parking restrictions already exist in many parts of the city, and we're going to extend these to better manage parking in and around our business and shopping areas. We don't want the sought-after parking in these areas taken up all day by just one car. We want to ensure the spaces can be used by multiple people visiting our shops, doing business, using our facilities, and spending time in cafes and restaurants. Of course, for some people and situations, car travel is a necessity. We're not stopping that. We're encouraging viable alternatives, because small changes can lead to big differences. That change starts with us. Victoria's population is growing, and Moreland is growing too. It's estimated that the Melbourne area will grow from 5 to 8 million people in the next few decades. They need to live somewhere. Some will choose to live here in Moreland. It's a great place to live. Moreland Council knows the challenges and opportunities that this increase in population brings. With 43,000 more people living here by 2036, there are important things to consider, plan for and act on. Things like housing, transport, our open spaces, and managing the impacts of construction activity. 43,000 new people, or around 18,000 new households, means taller buildings or more buildings on existing blocks. This is not what many of us are used to, but lifestyles are changing and we need to adapt. We want to encourage these taller buildings to be located near public transport routes and where daily needs like shopping and community services are just a walk away. This way, more people won't mean lots more traffic and congestion. More flexible use of our industrial land can help too. Some land can change to accommodate new work and local jobs, and some can provide housing.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors, members of the gallery and to our viewers live streaming tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Natalie Aboud and I'm the Mayor of the Moreland City Council and the Chairperson for tonight's council meeting. It's my pleasure to welcome you this evening. Our meeting is being held on the traditional country of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional custodians. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. I acknowledge that currently many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people call Moreland home. I also acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people never ceded sovereignty of their lands and have continuously cared for their country for over 60,000 years as the world's oldest living culture. Members of the gallery, please note this council meeting is being recorded and web streamed live to council's website and Facebook. This recording will be available on video as video on demand, gallery attendees are advised that they will be recorded during the meeting. Councillors are reminded that in line with the adopted councillor conduct principles as outlined in the Councillor Code of Conduct, councillors should ensure that they conduct themselves in the meeting with integrity, impartially exercise their responsibilities in the interest of the local community, and not improperly seek to confer or advantage any person. This behaviour will support principles for leadership and good governance that secures public confidence in the office of councillor. Members of the gallery, in the event of an emergency or disruption, we may be required to take action to ensure the safety of attendees. Please follow the directions issued by council staff and security officers. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. I'd like to introduce the councillors in attendance tonight. Councillor Sue Bolton, Councillor Anna-Olivia Carley-Hannon, Councillor Helen Davidson, Councillor Jess Dorney, the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Mark Riley, Councillor John Kavanagh,
Good evening.
Councillor Dale Martin,
Hi.
and Councillor Lambros Tapanos,
Good evening.
and Councillor Yildiz. Oscar Yildiz, sorry. You got your first name. I didn't forget it. I could never forget it. Okay. The officers in attendance, the Acting Chief Executive Officer to my left, Grant Thorne, the Acting Director of City Infrastructure, Greg Gale, the Director of City Futures, Kirsten Costa. Welcome back, Kirsten. The Director of Community Development, Arden Joseph. The Director of Engagements and Partnerships, Joseph Tobacco. The Director of Business Transformation, Sue Vucevic. The Unit Manager of Governance, Sally Curran. The Manager of Corporate Governance, Jodie Watson. And finally, the Executive Manager of Finance, Liz Rowland. Councillors, I note that Councillor Alia Farnley is on leave of absence from the 26th of August 2019 to the 13th of September 2019. And I'd also like to announce some councillors' leave of absence requests. So, councillors, I'd like to request the leave of absence for myself from the 12th of December 2019 to the 10th of February 2020. We've also received a leave of absence request from Councillor Dorney for the 15th of September to the 24th of October. So, councillors, could I please have a motion to grant a leave of absence? Councillor Davidson, and seconded by Councillor Riley. All those in favour? Against? I declare that carried. So I'll now move to disclosure and of interests and conflict of interests. Councillors, are there interests or conflicts of interest to declare?
I'd like to declare a conflict of interest on DCF 7219.
Thank you, Councillor Dorney. So if you could state, well, you have stated which item your conflict relates to, and what we'll do is immediately before we consider that item, I'll ask you to provide details of the type and nature of that conflict of interest. I'll then ask you to leave the chamber before the item is moved and to return after the item has been considered and voted on. Thank you. Councillors, could I please have a motion for the confirmation of the minutes of the council meeting held on the 14th of August 2019 and the special council meeting held on the 22nd of August 2019? Councillor Kavanagh and Councillor Bolton to second. Is there any debate on this item? No. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Councillors, now that we've confirmed the minutes and we do not have any special committees, we'll move on to petitions. So there is a petition in the agenda which is PET 1019, petition not to install a speed hump, John and Edward Streets, East Brunswick. Councillors, is there anyone that would like to briefly speak to the petition?
Check this. Anyone in the gallery?
Yeah, there might have been someone in the gallery.
Has it not already been presented to us? Is there anyone from the gallery that would like to speak? Come forward. Oh, yeah, we'll just get to that with question time. Yeah. So, Councillor Tapanos?
I'd like to move that the petition be received and the first petitioner be notified of any outcomes council resolves.
Yep. So, mover is Councillor Tapanos and seconded by Councillor Riley. Is there any debate on the item? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Councillors, are there any petitions to be tabled on behalf of residents? Yep. So we'll now move to petitions tabled by the gallery. I'd like to ask if any member of the gallery has any other petitions to be tabled this evening. Feel free to come forward to the lectern and briefly speak to the petition, and then I'll ask for a motion that the petition be received. Sorry, there's a lot of formalities. It's all...
My first council meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not my first, and you're doing better than me already.
I have a petition here for a safe pedestrian crossing for Elizabeth Street between Bell Street and Murray Road, and I seek Moreland Council's support to lobby Vic Roads for this safe crossing to be installed. I have a petition here signed by 364 people now, local residents of the area, who are very concerned about the unsafe road that many school children, mums, kids, commuters need to cross to access the Merri Creek path from the West Preston side. It's a really key cycling and pedestrian thoroughfare, and without any traffic lights, people are crossing a really dangerous road with a blind hill. It's only a matter of time before there's an accident, so just trying to do something about it.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Sarah Green.
Sarah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so do I have a mover for the petition to be received? Councillor Bolton and seconded by Councillor Riley.
Thank you.
All those in favour? Against? I declare that carried.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Fantastic.
Were you going to ask a question on that one?
Yeah.
I just want to know, that is in Moreland, is it?
on the
I can see that it's right on the
Straddles.
boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's Darebin and Moreland.
okay.
It's like the Merri Creek Bridge.
Yeah, great.
Schools on both sides.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thank you. I've been watching the count come in and getting email updates of the count, which is good. Thank you. Okay, before I move to public question time, I've just had some news. So I'd like to acknowledge Ryden Cowley, who is a Fawkner resident, and thank you, John Englert, for alerting me to this, who has had a race win last weekend. So the Australian Winter Race Walking Championships, the Open Men won, and in 1 minute and 26 seconds, which is 1 hour. How far did he walk?
20 kilometres.
Oh my Lord. 20 Ks in 1 hour and 26, which is quite remarkable, and well done to you. I'd also like to acknowledge Josh Barnes, who's been faithfully reporting in the Moreland Leader for quite some time. He's heading off to a new job at the Geelong Advertiser. So that's very exciting, and I'd like to thank him for all of his work in the city. And there's something else that I've also been asked to present. I'll just find my notes, which is just this statement. The council has a formal friendship relationship with Alayu, Timor-Leste, which was established in 2000 when Moreland signed an agreement with Janana Guzmao. 2 decades ago, on the 30th of August in 1999, a referendum was held in Timor-Leste to allow Timorese people to decide if they would become independent or have more autonomy under their Indonesian rulers. The result was close, 80% of the voters in favour of independence. Shortly after, the TNI, Indonesian military forces and other militia unleashed devastation across Timor-Leste, where 1,500 people were killed during this carnage and more than 300,000 persons displaced, which was almost half of the population of Timor at the time. This was in addition to Amnesty International estimates that 200,000 people probably died from military action, starvation or disease from the period lasting from 1975 to 1999. So I just want to acknowledge that next year Moreland City will mark 2 decades of the Friendship Agreement, democracy and Timor's nation building since that time. Thank you for standing by. I'll now move to public question time. This is an opportunity for 30 minutes for people to raise questions with councillors. I'd like to outline the process. Please note that if your question relates to a matter on any of the reports, this is the time to raise that question with us. Questions can also be submitted online prior to the meeting. A maximum of 2 questions is allowed per person, and questions that relate to a matter listing in the agenda will be dealt with first. When I invite you, you or your representative must ask the question without taking longer than 2 minutes. I will ring a bell when I find out where it is, or make some kind of noise, at 1 minute and 45 seconds, which means that you have 15 seconds to complete your question. If you've submitted a second question, it may, at my discretion, be deferred until all other persons who have submitted questions have asked their first question, and/or not be asked if the time allotted for public question time has expired. A maximum of 3 questions will be heard on any one subject, and we will proceed to the next topic, and if time allows, return to the previous topic. Either myself or another councillor will answer your question, or I will ask the Chief Executive Officer to either provide a response or refer it to another council officer. As detailed in the Meeting Procedure Local Law, Section 35(17), as chairperson, I have the right to disallow certain questions if they are defamatory, indecent, abusive, offensive, irrelevant, trivial or objectionable in language or substance. Having said that, it's never happened while I've been sitting this chair. If a response to your question is provided at tonight's meeting, there will be no further formal response. However, Council will action any commitments made in answering the question. Question time can only be extended for one 30-minute period, which would go to a whole hour, and only for the purpose of responding to questions that are related to matters listed on this evening's agenda. If your question cannot be answered, it will then be taken on notice and responded to between now and the next council meeting and reported in the governance report. We have 30 minutes and I want to make sure we hear all of the questions, so I also request that councillors who answer and officers address each question succinctly, and the commencement time of question time will be 7:20. So, I've got a question here which is related to the question is Andrew Roma on behalf of Kratz nominees. Thank you, Andrew. Did I get your name right? Roma?
Excuse me? Roma.
Roma, thank you.
Thank you, councillors. I have 2 questions. The first, they both relate to the proposed amendment to the council planning scheme. The first question is whether council is aware that based on the assumptions of the Conceptus Development Feasibility Report, of the 55 properties proposed for C3 rezoning, approximately 50% may not satisfy the report criteria for rezoning to C3, namely the commercial feasibility in the foreseeable future. These properties are the 4-storey preferred sites or those exceeding 1,600 square metres in area, which were not modelled in that report. I have a second question.
Would you like to read it now? And we can get them both answered together.
If council's opinion is that these properties are not commercially viable in the foreseeable future under the C3 zoning, will council consider sending all 55 properties, or at least the 4-storey preferred properties and sites larger than 1,600 square metres, to the Minister for Planning and seek the same policy outcomes as the previous amendment C164 and the recommendations from the independent panel?
Thank you. I'm going to ask the Director for City Futures to answer the question on the council's behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the Mayor. In relation to the consultant's report, the 4-storey height that is referred to, the calculations were actually done at 5 stories on the assumption that the heights controls are discretionary, and typically council receives applications that are 1 storey higher. So they have taken into account that potential of the sites to be at a higher height. And in terms of the second part of your question, sorry, I've just...
The first question?
Council's opinion that these properties are not commercially viable in the foreseeable future under C3 zoning, will the council consider sending all 55 properties, or at least the 4-storey preferred and sites larger than 1,600 square metres, to the Planning Minister and seek the same policy outcomes as the previous amendment, C164, and the recommendations from the independent panel?
So there are a lot of elements to that question, obviously. In terms of the expert advice that we've received, the amendment itself will take approximately 5 years to see development on the ground following its decision. And in the report, it actually states that it anticipates that timeline, and by that stage, it will be viable. So these are the sorts of conversations that the expert reports will be interrogated with at the panel hearing, and we can consider further, but that is certainly the advice that we have received and officers have relied upon for the amendment. In terms of council's decision to return to the C1 zone, Council has previously resolved to abandon that amendment, so it cannot revisit that decision. It will need to make a decision around what's before it this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten, and thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Linda LaRocca. Thank you, Linda.
Good evening. This is my first council meeting. So there were just a couple of questions in regards to the rezoning of the Brunswick area to Commercial 1 zone.
Let me just grab your name, please, Linda.
Linda LaRocca.
Thank you.
So in regards to the rezoning of some areas or pockets in Brunswick to a Commercial 1 zone, when there are clearly residential homes sitting on that land, I would like to know the justification behind rezoning a home to a Commercial 1 zone. And my second question is, what are the restrictions and benefits of creating a Commercial 1 on a home, a land that
Changing the
contains
zone.
only a home?
Yeah.
No commercial viability at all.
Yeah. Thank you. Kirsten, I'll ask Kirsten to answer for you.
Through the Mayor, I've just had a chance to look at the planning scheme and your current zoning, which is industrial. So it's a home that exists in an industrial precinct. So when council adopted the Moreland Industrial Land Strategy, it considered all the mix of properties within the precincts, and it made a recommendation that this precinct remain intact as an industrial area, but to consider it for a transition to not pure industrial, but to more generalised commercial. So in terms of the first question around changing a residential home, it does not change your use of that property as a residential home. You can continue to do that.
It may, although, change or restrict my change in home if I want to build, or my my resale value for the banks and the restrictions on the lending.
Linda, what we could probably do is, if you like, we could meet with you at some point and sit down and explain a bit better to you.
I've asked for that for 3 years actually, and not one councillor has actually wanted to meet with me. So
Sure. Well, I haven't heard from you, but I'm more than happy to do that. Yeah.
would love to sit in a room and have
Because
a chat.
the
Because I think it needs a lot more clarification for the
we can organise
residents.
that. Yeah. So someone will get your details and we'll follow that up with you. The Moreland Industrial Land Use Strategy precedes my time on council and has existed since before I was here, but we definitely have the information that we can share with you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Katie Jade.
Good evening, everyone. My questions are related to the heritage overlay that has been considered recently. I want to know if just as a heritage can be placed on a certain property, can it be reversed and how? And will my request for not wanting heritage will be taken into consideration when you make your decision?
Thank you. Katie, I'll ask the Director to respond to you.
Thank you, through the Mayor. I understand the address of your property has actually been explored on 2 occasions so far through the amendment, and has been discussed in full at the panel hearing as well. So we've had a number of experts look at the property and consider whether it does have heritage merit. On all of those occasions, it has been determined that it does have merit. So the decision before council tonight is to consider whether it will continue to apply that to your property, and the officer recommendation based on that expert advice is to place it on the property.
Can I tell you that there's nothing in that house is older than 24 years?
Well, the experts have actually visited the property, as has the panel, and the heritage advice is that that is of merit.
Thank you.
And you won't consider my request for not having it as heritage?
It's been under review, and the advice that's been given to us is that it is of heritage significance, so it's included in what's there. Thank you. Mario Butera.
Good evening, councillors and officers. I'm a resident of John Street, East Brunswick, and it's in relation to a petition that's been tabled with 35 objections to the restoration of a hump. The previous speed hump was removed nearly a year ago. If it's so essential for the hump to be restored, why has it taken so long is my first question. No incidents have taken place as vehicles have to slow down for the Edward Street intersection. So we're talking about the movement of a hump 15 to 20 metres. And you've got an intersection where cars slow down, and then you've got a very tight roundabout at Miller Street where it's very difficult to speed through. And the Miller Street intersection is about 60 metres or so from where the speed hump is. The proposed hump is a waste of taxpayers' funds. It's not wanted by the residents, as per a petition with 35 signatures on it. So it's requested that this replacement hump not be built, as it's a waste of time and money.
Thank you, Mario. I've noticed I've got a question from Yvonne Butera and Peter Parusolo.
Parusolo.
Yeah. If you maybe want to ask the three questions and we can answer them together, since they're all...
Well, I think they would like to present them individually.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I'll just get them all and then we can respond to them.
That's a very good idea.
So either Yvonne or Peter, whoever would like to go first.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Peter Parusolo. I'm a resident for 66 years in John Street, born and bred. So I haven't moved from John Street, and I've just given my age away.
67?
Yeah, 66. Yeah, well, but what I've noticed is, like, when the speed humps were introduced, there weren't as many cars, and that's why the speed humps were introduced, to slow those cars coming through. But over the last several years, I've noticed there's more and more traffic, more cars in John Street, and because of the number of cars, there's quite a queue, like turning into Glenline Road north of the speed hump. And so there's cars piled up, and at different times of the day there's about several cars waiting to turn into Glenline Road. So the opportunity to speed in John Street has really reduced over the last several years. And that's my point. And Mario's mentioned about the roundabout in Miller Street, and also we've got Edward Street, Arnold Street, and the speed hump is proposed to go into between those two areas, which is less than 50 metres from the corner of an intersection. There is a hump there at the moment, opposite the park, and that's a good spot for a hump. You know.
So, Peter, can you turn that into a question?
Yes, my question
Evidence?
is, why do we need a speed hump with the additional cars?
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thank you,
you.
Peter. And Yvonne, if you'd like to present your question as well.
Hi. When they built the original speed humps, there were 3 in the street, and they're very flat ones. And the speed limit at that stage was 60 kilometres an hour. That was about 20 years ago. And since that time, the speed limit's now been reduced to 40 kilometres an hour. So the speed humps that are there, that's what the cars used to slow down to when they were going 60 to go across. So it just doesn't seem any point. And we were just wondering if the council's collected data that there's been a problem, because we're all retired and we've never noticed anybody pulled up by police. We've never noticed anyone, and the neighbours are all very friendly, and no one's ever complained about it, and we just wonder why it's necessary.
Thank you, Yvonne. So I'll ask, again, the Director for City Futures just to give Mario and Yvonne and Peter an answer to their questions about the John Street speed hump, please.
Certainly. I'm sorry, I will need to take it on notice primarily. My understanding is that the speed hump was actually removed to facilitate some development in the street, and was a requirement of a permit condition for the developer to return it when the project was finished. So it's not actually going to be a taxpayer's expense. It should be the developer who was required to remove it or had to remove it to facilitate the development, but we'll investigate that further.
Okay, so we'll follow that up. Thank you.
Could I just take one more point to that?
Just because the idea is that we don't engage in a debate, otherwise we'll be talking all night, and maybe we can come back to it if we need to, because we will have a further conversation with you about it after this evening to follow it up with you. Stephen Weir, this is about Michael Street.
Good evening, Council. My question is just, can Council confirm that they are given full consideration around allocation of all the required funds for the street drainage upgrades at Saxon and Michael Street, an area that has had significant new development, prone to 1 in 100-year floods around every year, and without a flooding overlay? and that they will proceed with works as soon as possible, especially as we are entering towards potential spring rain similar to last year, where the floods nearly caused a 70-year-old man to nearly drown in a street drain on our street.
Yep.
Thank you.
We've got 3 questions on this issue, so I might get them all addressed together. Christian, would you like to come forward and present your question? Oh, Jodie's. She's coming behind you with a microphone. Thanks.
We can get you on screen.
Thank you. I would like to come back to what when it does going to start. So,
you're looking for time.
We are not going to have another flooding issue.
Okay, no problem, Christian. So as you know, because we've talked about it, the tender will, if it passes, if the motion passes, the tender will be awarded this evening, and I'll get some timeframes for you as well. And John Englard, I have a question from you about the same issue.
Yep.
Thank you. Also that time.
Very briefly, the question was, can some timeline be provided for these drainage works at Michael and Saxon Street to ameliorate the flooding caused by extreme rainfall events? And the context for this is we're getting more extreme rainfall events due to climate change. We're also getting bushfires in places that have never seen these. We have a climate emergency. We've got the climate strike happening on September 20th, and I would urge you to support that motion and the Extinction Rebellion motion as well. But this is a local issue on flooding, so I'm concerned. I'd like to see some timeframes. There was nothing in the report that was in the agenda on timeframes.
Thank you, John. So for Christian and John, just some detail, Greg, if you would, about timeframes, and for Stephen, just some detail about whether there's enough money in the proposed funding to address the issue, and specifically about what are those things called that pop off that somebody, the drain cut. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, subject to the decision of Council tonight, there will be sufficient funds to implement the full works that the engineers are proposing to resolve the flooding issues. In terms of timelines, again, subject to the decision tonight, we've progressed straight away with engaging the contractor through a formal contract. There will be some lead time in the contractor ordering the concrete materials that will be used for the underground storage. So it may take a couple of months for works to actually progress on the ground, but we will send correspondence to abutting residents prior to that actually occurring.
And could you just let me know if we've had any indication from the contractor who we expect will be awarded the tender if everything goes the way we expect this evening, about what their timeframes in terms of, sometimes you hire a carpenter and they can't do the job till next year. Like, if we heard anything about whether they're ready to hit the ground running or anything like that?
Yes, they'll be ready to hit the ground fairly quickly.
Okay.
As I indicated, there will be a lead time in the materials, the manufacture of the materials that we're proposing, so it will take a little while for works to physically appear on the ground, but they will be working in the background in getting ready.
I think there's plenty of recycled concrete around. Councillor Kavanagh?
Just to make the point that point 2, I think, outlines Council's commitment. We're looking at a project of over $1.6 million, and there were a shortfall of funds there, and so Council has brought forward next year's funding into this year. So Council is committed to this project and understands it's one that needs to be done with haste.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. If I can just send a message to the comms team. Apparently the volume in the gallery, out in the gallery, is very low. If you're able to turn it up, that would be fantastic. Thank you for your patience out there. Gabrielle Bennett.
Thank you. Good evening. My question is in regards to the new street furniture in front of the library.
I'd like to know why it was changed when it was in excellent condition, and I'm very concerned about the negative effect that has on people who use the area. So I'm speaking from, I'm a nurse, a community nurse that's worked with many people experiencing homelessness for many years. And I think Coburg has been seen as a fairly safe and inclusive area for people experiencing homelessness. I think now the new furniture that's got armrests prevents people from resting properly and lying down. And I think it serves, it's a symbol of you're not welcome here and move on. So I'd like to know why it was installed and, what can be done about it, because I think, people experiencing homelessness, it's incredibly difficult for them to have good physical, mental or social health without adequate housing. Obviously, removing the armrests isn't going to solve our housing crisis, but I think it's just one tiny thing that is actually of great support for people to be able to rest around that area and feel reasonably safe.
Thank you, Gabrielle. There are quite a few questions related to this issue, and it's a complex issue, and it's an issue that we can't resolve because it is about homelessness, which no way near enough is being done about. I know that from my the fact that I've been on the disability working group since I was elected to council, I think the implication with the handles is this, for people who can't get up off a bench. But I do agree that what's been done over there is not satisfactory, considering the mixed use of the space, and it will be addressed later on through a notice of motion. So I might just keep moving through the questions, and I'm sure we'll get lots of answers from lots of different people related to this particular issue, because it's pretty serious.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. So I've got Pier Giorgio and Nick Dolby and Chloe Persing. If you guys all want to bring yourselves forward and...
Yep, sure. Thank you very much, Mayor and councillors. My name is Pierre, and again, I'm also talking about the same issue. And just to give a bit of background, I've worked in the community sector for almost 30 years. I'm now working at North Richmond Community Health Centre with refugee and migrants. It's a very interesting place because obviously that's where the injecting centre is. So these issues are very... I see them daily and we discuss them daily. And I think, as the previous speaker has said, now I'm not too sure what the intention really was of putting the arms rests there, but they've obviously had quite a negative effect. And any things that we do sometimes have unintended effects. And unfortunately, what we have there now is called hostile architecture. And unfortunately, it's becoming more and more common around the world, where architecture is put to actually build to exclude people. And usually they exclude people who are the less well off. And really, the good thing of that area that people know is the northern seat of the Coburg Library. It was undercover, it's public, so it's actually safe for them. They've actually got toilets nearby. And the reality is, by people saying, oh, they don't look nice, or I feel unsafe, or whatever, we're actually just pushing homeless people to darker, to more dangerous places, and they'll feel even less safe. And really, as a person who's lived here for many years and as a homeowner, I would like to see an inclusive community. And I don't think an inclusive community is actually constructed by building more fences and more barriers. So my question is actually even more direct than the previous speaker, is when is the council going to remove those armrests? Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. I guess we couldn't say when they'll be removed until we address the notice of motion, but you'll know this evening what the plan will be once we talk to that particular motion. Nick?
Nick Dolby, Holt Crescent, West Brunswick. Okay, I've had 2 episodes of homelessness in my life. I've worked for Launch Housing Homelessness Services as a consultant. I'm also asking a question on behalf of Lenka Thompson, former councillor with Moreland City Council. I'm also a member of Moreland City Council's Library Advisory Committee, and I know the issues around rough sleepers and Coburg Library. I know that Council has been trying, working with Vincent Care and trying to assist people who have been rough sleeping. I know issues of antisocial behaviour have come up, and I know that Council has in the main sympathetically dealt with those. However, the hostile architecture is in place. It's interesting that it is in place outside the Coburg Library. It is not in place in Coburg Mall. So where the seats are not under cover, where the wooden seats are in the open air, there are no armrests. But where the seats have been replaced along Coburg Library, there are armrests. I understand that there are now backing to those seats, and that is a good thing for the windows of Coburg Library. However, yes, for over a decade now, people have been talking about hostile architecture. Hostile architecture that basically says, oh, you're using that, we don't like the way you're using that, we're going to make it hard for you. We're going to put spikes there. We're going to put barriers there. Look at all the tram stops and bus stops that had armrests put on their seats. Not for people with disabilities in the main. No, it was a deliberate attempt to stop people from sleeping there.
If you could turn that into a question.
So the question is, when are the armrests going to get removed?
Thank you. We'll get to that. Chloe Persing. I had a different question.
Hi, my name's Chloe Persing and I'm here representing Vincent Care Victoria and I'm speaking to the same motion. Obviously I work for Vincent Care Victoria and we are a provider of community services to people experiencing disadvantage, primarily people who are experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. And as Nick said, we've done a lot of work in this space, especially around trying to provide support and accommodation options for people who are sleeping rough. And I'm here today just to ask about whether Council is aware of the reasons that people are sleeping rough in the Coburg Mall and Victoria Mall area, and understanding the reasons behind that are around housing affordability and employment, homelessness as a result of trauma, family violence, the experience of incarceration and involvement in care systems, attraction to the area due to the sense of community and the poor emergency accommodations available, as well as seeing an influx following the closure of both Coburg Motor Inn and Stay Inn, which were used as poor but unfortunately the only accommodation options available.
That's right. I can answer some of that question because I live in between the Coburg Motor Inn and the Stay Inn, so I'm well aware that they're both closed. And there's a lot of complexity to the question. I am aware that council officers have been working fairly diligently to try and resolve some of those issues that exist in the mall for homeless people, and that it's a treacherous problem that we don't have support from the right places to resolve. That's my personal opinion. And I suspect other councillors and Councillor Bolton.
I've actually got a question for the council officers because I think it hasn't actually been answered in reply to the question so far, and that is I'm wondering if the council director could explain to the questioners why the armrests were installed outside the Coburg Library, and if disability access is the reason, why haven't the armrests been installed on other seating? And why was there no consideration to just a couple of seats with armrests outside the library, leaving the rest as is? Because that's a question which hasn't been answered, and this wasn't on the basis of a motion. That installing the armrest wasn't a motion that went through council, it was done through the organisation, and there is a motion that I've got on the table later on to remove the armrest, but it would be good for an explanation to the public.
Sure. So the Director of Engagement and Partnerships, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. The notice of motion which is being presented by Councillor Bolton this evening has some comments which provide some commentary around the nature in which the infrastructure has been installed. So essentially, Council has a program of upgrading its infrastructure throughout the municipality. We've invested quite heavily in the Coburg Activity Centre, in particular over the last 12 months. We did experience an intensification of people sleeping rough through the the Victoria Mall area specifically earlier this year. So the improvements were delayed as a result of our work with Vincent Care and other partners to actually deal with the issue in the best way possible. To reply to the question that Councillor Bolton has asked in relation to the scale, or rather why other seats within the mall have not been upgraded equally. There's a number of bench seats. In fact, all of the seating through Victoria Mall was bench seating. So there was no DDA, or rather Disability Discrimination Act compliant seating in the mall. There were upgrades proposed for the bench seats in front of the library, and there were no backrests. So the nature of the backrests being installed and the method in which they're currently configured has obviously an armrest which is incorporated into the overall structure that supports the slats. And to the topic of this issue in terms of whether changes can be made, that's the subject of a further discussion this evening.
Thank you. There are no councillors that would like to speak to the questions that have been raised about this issue, or are you happy to wait until and I'll probably bring it forward because I know that it concerns quite a few people that are in the gallery.
I'm just interested in Vincent Care's attitude to the armrests. I was listening intently to find out what their views were.
So,
would that be possible?
Yep. So are you saying that you want to ask Chloe a question?
Yeah, I was just interested, because I know you've worked extensively in there. What's Vincent Care's attitude to the armrests?
I think, first and foremost, as an organisation that works with people who are experiencing homelessness, we're not obviously advocates of hostile architecture, so to speak. I think the reasoning behind it around making spaces user-friendly for all or usable for all is important, but I think there does need to be consideration of the implications of what armrests have done for this space. And I think, it does sit within a much bigger structural issue around the experience of rough sleeping in the area, and what can we do to make it safe in lieu of other affordable and appropriate housing options.
Thank you for it.
Councillor Tapanos?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief because I know there'll be a debate later on, but I did want to ask one question to officers through the Mayor, and that was whether there is a policy in regards, a guiding policy in regards to the installation of street furniture, because I hear in the gallery some concerns, rightly so, in regards to homelessness, and I've also heard some concerns in regards to DDA compliance, and I know that we need to make our spaces usable by all, but it seems to me that what we're really needing is a policy position that takes all of this into consideration. So I was wondering whether there was such a guiding policy in place.
I'd be relying on you for that kind of information. You've been around for a while.
Through the Mayor, we do have a suite of what we call tech notes. We do publish on the Moreland website, which is an array of sort of standard street furniture, civil infrastructure, etc. There is obviously opportunity for exceptions outside of that. The tech notes do allow for that. We do have a standard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Councillors might want to take a look at those tech notes and see if that needs updating. I need to call for an extension of time, please. Councillor Bolton, and seconded by Councillor Riley. All those in favour? Against? I declare that carried. Okay, the next question I have is Megan Street.
Hi, my name is Megan Street and I'm a resident of Warden's Walk in Coburg. We are undoubtedly facing a climate emergency. We see many signs of this. We have calamitous fires in New South Wales and Queensland at the moment that are absolutely unseasonably early. We also have the unenviable position of many of these firefighters having to make the heartbreaking decision of which fires they fight and which fires they have to leave because they have an absolute dearth of water in many towns in New South Wales, so droughts, fires, etc. Given that Moreland Council has already declared a climate emergency, very rightly so, I'm just wondering, will Moreland City Council support and officially endorse the upcoming climate events that are coming up in the future? So, including the student strike for climate that's happening on September the 20th, the upcoming Extinction Rebellion actions, which are happening in October, and later in October, the IMARC blockade.
Thank you. From my own perspective, on the 20th, we've organised a new banner which says Moreland Council on it and has no dates or specific. It's not like the Pride March. It's not like the More Pride banner where it's specifically for the Pride March. This is just a Moreland banner that people can take to rallies or demonstrations, and I'll be carrying that, and anybody's welcome to help me because it's too big for one person. And I know that councillors from the table have been at some of the Extinction Rebellion events, and I'm not quite sure of some of those dates in the future, so I couldn't make a commitment, but I certainly support the work. Are there other councillors that... Councillor Bolton?
I'd like to just say a few brief words, but then there's going to be a debate because there are motions to support the climate emergency actions. My personal viewpoint is council should be backing all of these actions because I think people are very alarmed. A lot of people in Australia are very alarmed about not just the temperature getting hotter, but the ability of the community to fight all these natural, not so natural disasters as a result of climate change, and the fact that firefighters, there's no water in the dams to fight the fires, so they have to choose which ones to fight, as you say. I think people are desperate because they don't see some governments from acting, especially our federal government, and don't see big corporations acting as well. So I think a lot of people are recognising now that we need community action to put pressure on the powers that be to have emergency action on climate change. Because I don't think we can cope with if 50-degree temperatures become the norm in Australia, throughout Australia. I don't think people can cope. We'll see a massive increase in deaths as a result of heat waves and so forth, and that's where the direction things are heading in. So that's my personal capacity. We'll see which support later on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Are there any other councillors that would like to respond? Councillor Riley?
Yeah, look, I personally support these things. I mean, much of my time before I came on council was working with Climate Action Moreland and groups like that. So I'm very supportive of those things, and I'm hoping I might even get to the first climate strike on Friday. But if I don't work, I don't get paid, so it's not exactly striking, but it's something akin to it. The one thing I'm a bit curious about with the Extinction Rebellion stuff is that they continually say that all politicians are not doing enough, and I couldn't disagree with that, except that I do think local government politicians have actually been the leaders in this space for decades. In fact, this city has been that, and I would just
That's why I mentioned the climate
with some of
emergency.
your colleagues, because it kind of grates me every time I read that, because I actually think we've got a strong record in this city, and the climate rebellion people just need to realise who their allies are, because I know who my enemies are, and it's the lack of leadership federally, and it's the fairly weak state objectives and goals that they've set in this space as well. And you've just outlined what's happening. I couldn't agree more. So I'm all for it, but I just would like a little bit more alliances happening that are actually fair dinkum and worthwhile pursuing, because I don't think we're part of the problem. I think we're part of the solution with you.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. I think we're good. We will be talking about it further this evening. James Conlon.
Yes.
Hello, councillors. Yes, I'm James Conlon from the Upfield Corridor Coalition, a local community campaign about the level crossing removal project. I'm also a member of the Council's Community Advocacy Reference Group, the CARG. So to Moreland Council's credit, Council recently established the CARG in response to pressure from the community. The CARG was set up to act as a conduit between the LXRP, the community and Council by establishing formal pathways for communication and a consistent advocacy position on this $460 million legacy project. At the second CARG meeting last Tuesday, the 3rd of September, a significant portion of the meeting was spent discussing cycling and pedestrian issues in relation to this project. While council officers mentioned they were meeting with the LXRP that week, on Friday the 6th of September, they did not disclose to the group that this was specifically a cycling stakeholder meeting involving Bicycle Network and the Moreland Bicycle User Group, and not the Upfield Corridor Coalition or the CARG members. If this detail was not known at the Tuesday meeting, Council had all week to tell the CARG when they knew, to seek talking points from the CARG and to represent the LXRP, to request that the LXRP invite the CARG and the UCC, the Upfield Corridor Coalition, to this meeting. None of these things happened. These actions raise questions as to whose allegiance Council lies, community or the LXRP, the state government. My question is, A, does Moreland Council have an agreement, formal or informal, such as a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, with the LXRP? B, if so, what elements of the LXRP does this agreement cover? C, if there is an MOU, what elements conflict with the aims of the community vision drawn up by the Upfield Corridor Coalition and endorsed by this council, to which $30,000 of community funding has been provided? And D, finally, if there is an MOU, which elected councillors have seen it? I'd like an answer from each councillor on this particular item, and a simple yes or no is fine.
Thank you, James. Did you want to address the first part of the question?
The first question, or statement rather, there has been an email, quite a comprehensive email that's been provided to you late last week in response to the matters that you've raised. I think that email adequately responds to the questions that you've raised. I think there was a misunderstanding of the nature of the meeting, the questions that were raised at the meeting and the information that was shared with members of the CARG. So I think that's important to note. The second question in relation to does Council have an MOU with the LXRP? In short, Council has several MOUs with all agencies that it works with across different government levels. So an MOU is certainly not something that's uncommon. So to respond to your question, the short answer is yes. Your second point was what elements does the agreement cover? The nature of agreements are generally confidential in nature. So these are basically essentially the other party to say that they're happy to release that. So you have access to the FOI process through the LXRP to obtain a copy of that document. Your last point was if there is an MOU, does it compromise Council's ability to achieve the aims of the UCC or the CARG? In short, no. Thank you.
And if there is an MOU, does it compromise Council's ability to achieve the aims of the UCC or the CARG, to which some $30,000 of community funds have been allocated? Oh, okay.
So clarify.
Hang on, it's not a conversation, James. I knew this would happen because I've had lots of arguments with you. We can talk about this on Tuesday.
Wow.
The questions have been put and the questions have been answered. And in the meeting procedure local law, there's a scenario where unless anyone wants to answer specifically, I can say that no, we haven't seen an MOU. Unless anybody has seen an MOU and would like to acknowledge that. Thank you. Question?
Well, I thought James didn't want to debate, but I thought he was just seeking clarification. If it's just clarification, I thought that might be okay. But
Can I just say this?
That it won't be made public.
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, our relationships with the state government and with LXRP are there to facilitate Council's objectives in regards to its advocacy program, in regards to what Council and through Council the community wants to see. So you should actually see those relationships as a positive to be able to achieve our goals. So I will encourage you to continue with the process that we've set up and brainstorm as much as possible what we actually want to see so we can actually utilise those relationships and make that representation to the state government. So I would be quite pleased to know that there is an MOU in place and we have a good working relationship, because that way we can actually achieve what you want to see and what the community at large wants to see.
James, what did you need to clarify? Sorry.
So just that council won't be making that MOU public?
No.
It can't.
Okay, thank you.
It's a confidential document.
Thank you.
Sarah Green.
Thanks, Council. Just on the same issue as the petition that I submitted before.
Sorry, hang on a sec. I'll just get a bit of quiet. I didn't hear what you were saying. Thank you.
Just further to the petition that I submitted at the start of the council meeting, what is Moreland Council doing to ensure the safety of pedestrians and cyclists crossing Elizabeth Street between Bell Street and Murray Road?
Thank you. Winston? I suspect what we might be doing is responding to the petition.
Yes, I thought that.
Yes,
Anything to add?
that's what we all need to do. Yeah, certainly.
Yes?
Question of Sarah. I was just wondering if you could maybe indicate, if you know, what the main area where a pedestrian crossing needs to go and which school, like what are the things
What's
that
around it?
cause a lot of pedestrians to cross at that particular point?
Okay, so just to paint the picture, you've got Bell Street, which is an incredibly busy street up one end, Murray Road at the other. It's probably a kilometre distance between the two main roads. So walking from my house across to Merri Creek, I have the option of turning right and walking 500 metres to Murray Road, crossing at the pedestrian lights and walking 500 metres back to the opposite side of where I would access the Merri Creek Trail. So if I was going to work on my bike, if I was taking my daughter to the park, I see heaps of school kids going to Coburg High crossing at that point. If you look, so back to the end of my street, if you look to the left, you've got a blind rise, so you actually can't see the cars until they're right in front of you. So it's incredibly dangerous. And the footpath, thank you, Sue. So there's no footpath on the left. So the only option is to walk 500 metres on your right up to Murray Road. There's no footpath on the Coburg Cemetery side.
Yeah.
There's also a tram for Nicholson Street and Bell Street. So lots of people also go to work. And 2 bus stops on Elizabeth Street. So people, jumping across that road all day, super dangerous.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jack.
Good afternoon to the councillors, Mayor, and the council staff and the gallery and residents. This is, I think it's the 4th time I'm here. I know I've got 2 minutes. I'll try to get to the question. But very quickly, I'd like to thank the council officers with all the documentation they put in terms around the heritage, and also what I've just read this today. I think we're going to discuss it, and in particular, I'm very encouraged. In particular, M8.5 opportunities to grade separate pedestrian and bicycle connections. I love that word, grade separate. So whether we go over or under at Moreland Road and Bell Street is great to hear. Now, what I want to get into is you encouraged us, Mayor Natalie, to go to the state, and I'm also, like I said, a long-time resident of this municipality, over 31 years. Former president of the Brunswick Traders Association, ran for council. Mr. Tapinos will know that ran early 2000 together. So I am familiar with all the politics in this municipality. So I do get passionate when we get $500 million, $500 million coming through, and I think it's Mr. Kavanagh. I think it's 10 times our capital works budget. I think at your budget you said was for 45 million, so it's 10 times. So to get $500 million coming through is a big project. So the minister's written back. There's not much there. She said the LXRP will be writing to us, and they did. But what I want to get into is what is actually happening on the ground. Now, what is happening on the ground? Natalie, I heard you about the emergency that you talked about, the climate emergency that we've got. Well, I want to introduce another word, emergency, that we've got at the moment with this project. I talked about how important this project is in terms of fighting for and trying to get what we want. So the emergency that we're talking about at the moment is after the survey that the LXRP set out, the most important things are breaking it down into trees, cycling and heritage. So most important thing is this is what we're getting at Gondolfa Gardens. You can see all that, that's in the red, 80-90% of those trees are going. So we're not doing very well on the ground in terms of getting the community outcomes of that we discussed with UCC.
I just need you to get to the question because you're...
But it's very important what's
I
happening on the ground
understand the
here.
importance. We're
You can
addressing
see
it later
this
on
snake
too.
at Bell Street. We're going to force cyclists to go under, right, more at at Bell Street, and then come around. We really need to sit down with the LXRP, and I know that's what you're trying to do to get a better outcome. So to my question, and which includes heritage, as you know, heritage was the third listed here, and the question is this. I know that John Holland's been awarded the contract to build this infrastructure. So the question is, with a lot of contracts that do early works, so if John Holland comes in and during the early works, would they be able to remove that signal box, the heritage signal box, which is under a heritage protection order at the moment? So would we allow the process to finish and then make a decision to remove it, or have they got the authority to actually remove it prior to the heritage review going through?
Thank you.
And sorry, would we put an injunction if the latter was the case? In other words, if they came in to remove the signal box, would we consider putting an injunction into to protect that box, the signal box at Munro Street?
Thank you.
Jack, thanks for your question. Great questions. I wish I was able to answer them. Unfortunately, I will have to take them on notice. We'll certainly do some more exploratory work around whether or not council can seek to use other powers, whether that is an injunction or something else. We are also waiting on the outcomes of the Heritage Victoria application. So we are working closely with the advisory group. We are trying to communicate as clearly as we can with the community around where things are currently at, and obviously through the chamber with reports that are considered. So I will come back to you hopefully in the next couple of days responding to that question.
Thank you. Thanks, Jack. Okay, councillors, that concludes public question time at 8:10. And I'll now move to the on-notice responses. So, councillors and members of the gallery, just to note that on-notice responses are now reported through the governance report. So we'll get to that as we go on. Now, I'll now move to the council reports, but I think what I should do is probably bring forward some of the items and specifically the notice of motion, which is called, let me just get to it, I think it was the first one.
Designing and providing public spaces, is that the
So
right?
notice of motion 4919, designing and providing public spaces which support homeless people. Councillor Bolton?
And also be good to bring forward the Michael Street one as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I also state that the first item on the agenda also relates to homelessness as it talks about affordable housing. So I think that's just important to note as well.
Thank you.
Brunswick Activity Centre, the
Second.
Third one.
Thank you. Can we just move to notice of motion 4919 and we'll get through everything?
Okay.
Thank you.
So this motion, for anyone who hasn't seen it, is that council recognises all people, including homeless people, have a right to use public spaces and facilities, including bench seating where it is possible for people to stretch out. 2, acknowledges the deplorable state of homelessness in Moreland, 771 on census night, and Australia 116,427 on census night. 3, recognises public space and infrastructure can cause discrimination against homeless people, such as spikes installed on the ground in doorways and armrests installed along bench seats. 4, removes the armrests installed on the bench seats outside the Coburg Library. Actually, I should add the word in immediately or as soon as possible. Removes the armrests installed on the bench seats outside the Coburg Library as soon as possible. And then a little bit of a change to point 5, which I circulated a bit earlier. So point 5 has been changed to receives a report which reviews council's technical specifications for urban design improvements and catalogue of standard street furniture to gain an understanding of council's objections and to ensure our public spaces are welcoming and inclusive of all users, and that no committee members are excluded from accessing our public spaces due to any element of the design or infrastructure. And lastly, opens the XLU public toilet in Victoria Mall 24 hours a day for a trial lasting 6 months.
And Councillor Riley's happy to second.
So I'd like to speak to it. My feeling in Australia at the moment is homelessness and people on the verge of homelessness is heading in the direction of Great Depression situation. And you know, there are homeless camps in various parts of Melbourne, you know, parks, various sorts of places, because, and it's a combination of low incomes, casualised work, you know, New Start hasn't been lifted for over 20 years, low wages and lack of affordable housing. And then lack of access to services, mental health and other services. So, I mean, all of those are reasons for our homelessness issue at the moment. Now, obviously, street furniture doesn't resolve the issue of access to housing, but people have to go somewhere. People aren't going to just vanish into thin air if they don't have a house. Some people are homeless because one man I met, he was working, his boss didn't pay him, and so he ended up being homeless because his boss didn't pay him and he lost his job. And so there's many ways in which people end up being homeless. And he couldn't afford his housing, so he lost access to his rental housing. Now, regardless of intentions of council with the changes that were made to the seating outside the Coburg Mall, regardless of motivations or whatever, it is a fact that certain designs of street furniture and public spaces pushes people away. And it might not even be people who are permanently homeless or homeless for a long period of time. It might be someone who's just suddenly a woman who's lost access to a house because of domestic violence that night, and she just ends up in the Coburg Mall. What are you going to do? So things, you know, she might not intend to be homeless, didn't envisage herself being homeless, but she's, you know, been, you know, violently treated. So all of those sort of circumstances can lead to some people being in public spaces, Coburg Mall, and often, or other places. Some people feel safer in a more public space than pushed to a dark corner in a park. Along the banks of the Merri-bek, a lot of people would feel more safer that there might be passers-by, so that if someone tried to violently attack them, there would be, you know, someone to raise the alarm. So some people are more likely, not everybody, but some people who are sleeping rough on a particular night would prefer to go to a public space. I think the... Oh, so is it time? No, sorry.
No, almost.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think the if disability access is the real reason for the armrests being put on the bench seats outside the Coburg Library, there's no need for armrests right along the whole strip of bench seating outside the Coburg Library, but not to put armrests on the bench seating in other parts of the Coburg Mall. So I think that is highly contradictory. And I think my motion is to immediately, or as soon as possible, remove the armrests, and also for review of our guidelines and specifications around the design of public spaces and street furniture to make sure we don't have, you know, we don't design things in such a way that we push people out of the mall or any other place.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Riley?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Bolton. I've worked with Councillor Bolton on developing this. I also want to acknowledge former Councillor Lenka Thompson, who drew this to my attention pretty much once she noticed this, and then helped draft this notice of motion as well. So I want to acknowledge her and thank her for that. I agree with Councillor Bolton. These are about economic issues and the way people on low incomes and people on New Start allowance and other statutory incomes can't afford to maintain their housing. The lack of investment by federal governments and state governments in local in public housing and social housing is another major factor in this. And I've worked in this area and share the concerns in the way that we treat people. But I am not so sceptical about the fact that we were trying to install furniture that was what's called Disability Discrimination Act or DDA compliant. I think I'd like to foreshadow that we actually amend item 4 to say that we remove most or some of the armrests. So we actually get a balance somewhere between the disability issues and the concerns for people with those concerns, or older and frail people, but also particularly for the people who are needing to have a lie down in some shade or under some shelter as opposed to being out in the middle of the mall. We have been working to get and address the issues, and I think we've done a lot there, and I want to acknowledge the staff. I want to acknowledge the Affordable Housing Committee that's considered some of these issues and continues to do that, and that plan is on our agenda tonight as well. I think there's a lot of work being done, and St Vincent's or Vincent's Care came this evening with sorry, I've just lost your name, but Chloe, thank you, Chloe, and other people who presented here. Nick Dobb, who's been experienced homelessness himself. I think we need to really address both these issues. I think we can do both, and I think that Sue's amended point 5 will help us to understand a bit more about our specification designs. I think we've got another amendment as well, which I'm not sure around. I'm just trying to recall whether we had one in the system. Sorry, that was to do with trying to ensure that we address that issue of specification designs. Is that what it's turned into?
Yeah.
Thank you. Is that right, Grant?
Yeah.
Sorry. So yeah, thanks, Sue, for that. I'm just catching up on the amendments as they flow through today. I think I'll leave it at that. I'd just like to see perhaps if Sue's amenable to actually including that some or most.
Or 50%. I was going to propose 50%.
I don't want to put a proportion, just some or most. Sue, were you happy with one of those?
I would say 80%.
80%.
It's like gambling.
So let's come.
I don't know how many there are currently.
There's a photo that I just sent you, John.
Sorry,
I'm going to leave it at that and come back to we'll just clarify the amendment.
If we could just clarify how many benches there are and how many of the we know all of them have handles. Are there 4 benches, or how many benches are there? 5. 5. Right. 5. Thank you.
80 works well.
Is there a question about that, actually? I'd like to actually ask a question about that.
Yeah, of course.
Currently, the armrests aren't done in the way of traditional disability armrests, because traditionally disabled armrests would be fairly close together. So actually, if these were genuinely for the use of people with disabilities, at the moment, the spacing of the armrest means you would only have currently only have an armrest on one side and not on the other side. So I actually think there needs to be going back to the drawing board on the question of disability access. So I actually would rather actually just keep the motion as is, and maybe a future resolution we could consider allocating a certain space. But at the moment, the armrests are totally useless for people with disabilities and elderly people.
So could we please find out if the armrests, the way they have been installed, are DDA compliant, even though you would lift yourself up with one armrest rather than having one either side, like maybe in an old people's home?
No, some people have a working stick.
Yeah, I just want to double check if that makes it DDA compliant. We don't know. Yeah.
Perhaps the way forward, I've just emailed a quick sort of couple of words that I'd like to see if might be acceptable or might be able to be debated as an amendment, and that is to actually remove dot point 4, 5 and 6 and replace that. Council resolved to develop a policy to guide its street furniture installations and also review technical specifications, acknowledging that all people have a right to access our street furniture. The policy should include consultation and come back to council as a matter of urgency.
Councillor Bolton and
Not acceptable.
yeah, I wouldn't have thought so. Okay. Okay. So I'd like to propose.
Yeah, I'd second that.
Okay. So what we'll do now is just a matter of process. So Councillor Tapanos has put an amendment that 4, 5 and 6 be removed. Councillor Kavanagh has seconded it.
Yes.
Councillor Tapanos, would you like to speak to
Yeah,
it?
thank you. Look, this is a very complicated issue and a lot of issues subsequently have raised from it. I do understand the urgency, but I, for one, sit here as a councillor wanting to make decisions with all of the information before us. And I don't want to be necessarily here on a regular basis in this chamber discussing what arms rests are installed in what public places. We make policies here to guide a massive organisation, a council that has many public places, staff, 1,200 staff, a huge budget. Today, a formal council meeting, we've identified that we have a policy weakness, a shortage. We should move to rectify that shortage, not make decisions on the run, as important as they may seem now. They may have unintended consequences. They may breach DDA laws. They certainly haven't been done in consultation with the community at wide, with the view of the Disability Advisory Group. So the proper way for council to proceed here is to recognise that this is an issue. I think we all agree. But to actually go back and do its work and develop a policy that guides the installation of street furniture. Now, that policy might include a compromise 50-50 or 80-20 or whatever it may be. But the proper way to actually address this issue is through a policy. It's the long-lasting way, and it's the way that's going to have the most benefit, not an ad hoc, last minute, let's remove one street handle here, one chair there, one bench here. It's not good governance. It's not the way we should be operating. Thank you.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Well, I think Councillor Tapanos has expressed my view very well. Probably the only thing I'm quite happy also to see the public toilet open 24 hours a day as a trial as well. But I know this motion doesn't say that, but that would be one thing that I'd also be happy to see happen straight away.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Bolton, would you like to reply?
Well, I'd definitely like to oppose this. Firstly, Councillor Tapanos in his amendment is removing anyone, whether you're homeless, a pedestrian coming from the tram or the bus late at night, you're removing everyone's access to public toilets basically through your amendment, regardless of your status in society. Secondly, that you're also removing the point to receive a report to review council's policy. So I don't see the point of that either. So point 5 of my motion, which you're wanting to axe, is to review the policy with a view to having specifications for street furniture that are welcoming for everyone in the public. And I think, we actually need to go back to the drawing board in this. I think we need to remove the armrests and then come back and resolve the question of a percentage of the seating for people with disabilities. But if we're genuine about that and not just tokenistic, we'll be looking at all street furniture and not just a Coburg Library. And you also have to look at, certain proportions, because I think, we should not be designing the seating outside the library with a view to deterring people from being there if they end up being short, in a predicament late at night, and they need to lie down and sleep somewhere, unless you're proposing they sleep on the footpath in the middle of the mall where they're open to the elements. Maybe that's what you're proposing, or maybe you're proposing that people be chased to a dark corner and sleep there. But it's
All right,
but I think, you know, I think the motion stands and I oppose the amendment.
I think what I might do is just put the amendment to the vote, and then we can move on with the rest. Did you want to speak to the amendment?
I want to speak in debate about the amendment, yes.
Yep.
Thanks. I want to propose that we actually call for an urgent report. So I'm flagging an amendment for item 4, that we call for an urgent report regarding the removal of all, most or some of the armrests installed on the bench, in terms of being able to get this clarified in terms of policy. So I like the intention of
Because
Councillor
you've seconded
Lambros's.
the motion.
I'm speaking to the amendment. So
Right, okay, yep.
so I'm flagging that I want to, I'm speaking against this. I like the intention of this, but I'm also flagging that I'd like to propose an amendment to include that we call for an urgent report regarding the removal of all, most or some of the armrests installed in the Coburg Library, because this is a policy we need to think about in the broader mix. So I like what we're suggesting, and we stick with the substantive and consider that as on for foreshadowed amendment to the original motion. So I'm arguing against this, but
I would be happy to include an additional sentence to have the urgent report, because I think the motives and the objectives of where we want to get to are the same. So that additional sentence of to include an urgent report, come back to council to remove some, all, or in this area, I think that would be very acceptable to me, because that's the intent.
Okay.
If you want to draft that additional sentence.
So now we're dealing with some changes to your proposed amendment that Councillor Kavanagh has seconded. Could we just clarify? Yeah. Do you want to put those words again, please?
No, I was actually foreshadowing a motion that the original, I would be arguing against this, and I want to amend the original motion so that item number
Shall we deal with the
4,
amendment?
yeah, so I'm actually arguing against this one and flagging that on number 4, that I'd be actually amending it, that it would be an urgent report for, calling for an urgent report that we look at removing all, most or some of the armrests in the Victoria Mall. But then I'm agreeing to Sue's amended number 5, because that actually is calling for an overview of how we're doing this in the main, which is what Councillor Lambros is suggesting in here already.
Okay, I'm going to put Councillor Tapanos's proposed amendment that Councillor Kavanagh has seconded to the vote. All those in favour?
Can I also just close the debate? Or?
Not for a second, any new procedure.
All those in favour? Against? I declare the amendment lost. Now, Councillor Riley, because you seconded the motion, you can't amend the motion. So you would either have to find somebody else to propose the amendment or withdraw the second. Councillor Kavanagh, because I feel like this, the motion that you have proposed is close to being acceptable to most of the councillors, I wonder if it works for you to say at point 4, and I'm proposing an amendment, at point 4, remove armrests from 3 of the 5 benches, and maybe even split each of the points so we vote on them one at a time if there's an issue with any of the other points of the amendment. Because I suspect that if you're happy to remove the armrests from 3 of the 5 benches, potentially it might be acceptable to the council to be able to be passed.
I'd prefer to keep it as is.
It's acceptable or it's not?
Wouldn't die in a ditch if this gets passed.
So is it acceptable as an amendment? Otherwise I'll have to find a seconder.
I'd rather not accept it. I'd rather just vote it, and then if this gets up, I'll support it.
So I need a seconder for that proposed amendment.
To remove armrests from 3 of the 5.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm happy to propose.
Thank you.
That.
Okay, so just very briefly, I've sort of already spoken to it. I think that removing 3 of the 5 bench armrests makes it realistic and something that we can get an instant result on. Everything else stands as it's written, and I suspect that Councillor Riley might have someone propose another amendment to the rest of it. Did you want to say anything in support of the amendment to the point?
The amendment,
4?
just to the amendment.
Yes, yeah. So changing all of the armrests to 3 of the 5 armrests, 3 benches worth of the 5.
That's up there. Removes 3 of the 5.
Well, I feel like I can't talk to just that without talking to the
You
whole
don't need
thing.
to speak
So
to
can
it.
I speak to it maybe? Yeah,
of course.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that would like to speak against Councillor Bolton?
My personal feeling is that we should remove all the armrests and then install disability compliant armrests at appropriate spaces at one end rather than doing something like this. I feel that the spacing for the armrests are incorrect. It is my feeling at the moment for people with disabilities. So I would rather just remove them all and start again with the correct spacing for. So I'll speak against this, but if it gets voted up, it would be a better situation than a whole motion going down. So I won't die in a ditch if it gets voted up.
Sure. Would anyone else like to speak to my proposed amendment?
Just to simply say, I think that's a good compromise in the short term. I'll be supporting that.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. I might just put it to the vote. All those in favour of the amendment that I proposed? Against? So the amendment's carried. So now we have a substantive motion. Councillor Riley, has someone got words for your? Okay, so we're now speaking to Councillor Bolton's motion, which has a slight amendment to it. Is there anyone else that feels that?
So just to clarify, point 4 now is what was. I mean, otherwise they're conflicting motions, aren't they?
Removes armrests, yeah.
From 3 of the 5.
And that replaces the original point 4. Councillor Martin.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone in the gallery. We do tend to overcook things sometimes. This might be an example of it. I fully support Councillor Bolton's motion here. I think reality is that they probably should all be removed. We should look to see if they are DDA compliant. If one of the 5 is the right spacing, then we should probably leave it. I'm happy with this because at least it gets us some traction towards it. I really do think that this is probably a simple review and probably a sentence in our tech notes to resolve. I'm not sure whether or not we need reports and policies on top of this. I trust officers. They might have probably misjudged the rollout on this occasion, but I think if we just put a line item in the tech notes, I think we'd probably resolve the situation and stop it from happening again. But I'm fully supportive of this motion, and I welcome having a balance between having some of the armrests removed and at least having some DDA compliant seats. And I do agree with Councillor Bolton wholeheartedly that we should be looking at other seats around the city, especially around our kind of activity centres, to make sure that there is appropriate DDA seating elsewhere, not just undercover as well.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Any other councillors like to speak to the substantive motion?
Just to say quickly that I do think it is not as simple as changing the technical specifications. If you have a read of those, you will notice that they do talk about the design of the actual armrests or the furniture in itself. But what actually does need to occur is a greater piece of work around how do you actually make all street furniture in all places accessible to everyone. So I don't think it's as simple as having a look at the technical specifications. I think what it needs is a policy. But I'll accept that my amendment to do so has been defeated, but I would say that without that kind of guiding principle, we would have this occur again and again and again. And I think if you want to put an end to it once and for all, you develop the policy position.
Can I get an indication of whether you're likely to support or refuse the motion?
I'm likely to support because I agree with the sentiment. I don't know why 3 as opposed to 4 or 2 or whatever. I have no
I just wanted to check
evidence around that.
Councillor Carly Hannon.
I'd like to speak in favour, really just to reiterate what's already been said by the gallery around the fact that it is hostile architecture and that we've already heard that literally the reason why this was done is actually to prevent people from being able to sleep there. In terms of what Councillor Tapanos is talking about with the idea of policies and stuff, like I certainly agree with that, but I also think sometimes you do actually just have to look at a particular space and make a decision around how it's going to work for everyone. I think we can make a call on that, especially those of us who are members of, who represent this ward, go, through this mall every day and recognise that, whether the aged want to use this as well, it's good to have a few handrails, not necessarily particularly for disability, but for anyone that needs a bit of assistance. But that doesn't mean that we should be removing people's ability to also lie down there. The other thing I'd like to point out is that with this space, we already know that it's not big enough to actually benefit everyone that uses Coburg Mall. Like, there are so many people, and it's great that we have such a diversity in that space, but the whole reason we're looking at things like Coburg Square is because we know that the capacity of that area to grow is there. So I think we don't want to say it's this or that. We actually want to say we need more for everyone to be included. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carly Hannon. Any other councillor? Councillor Dorney?
Yeah, so I would like to also, I think it's clear by now that I support a substantive motion. This is a complex issue, and I actually would like to commend Councillor Bolton for bringing this to the chamber. But I would also like to thank the work of the officers that did, I believe, have the right intent, and were trying to really balance many different stakeholders that access and utilise and have livelihoods at the Coburg Mall. So I would just like to acknowledge and recognise that. It is a complex issue, but at the end of the day, we have an obligation to be making sure that our public spaces are accessible to all. And I really, I think that there have been some unintended outcomes that have happened with the installation of this. I think that just highlighting some good things that have happened in the process of looking at this asset renewal and the DDA compliance. We do have a lot of older people at Coburg Mall. I love Coburg Mall. I love going there and shopping there, and I love the diversity, particularly with the older community. But recognising that we need all users need to be included in our spaces. But there have been a number of outcomes that have started as a result of conversations, one being stronger partnerships with Vincent Care, and actually starting to go there to Coburg Mall more regularly, and actually starting to have more of a dialogue with people that are homeless in our community, which I can't even, people don't choose these situations, and it's quite confronting. I've never been homeless. I've come close once, actually not being able to get a job when I first moved to Melbourne. And if I didn't have family and friends, I probably would have been on the street after a certain point. But I had family and friends and I had that support. So people that don't have that, I can't even begin to imagine the desperation. And I really, Councillor Bolton's, when she talked about, these are places where people can feel safe at night. It's not out in the open, it's not exposed to the elements. And I think that's a really important thing. I feel a bit emotional because this is an emotional issue. We're talking about people. So I think that this motion goes away to really balance all the stakeholders' views. I recognise that the traders have a right to feel safe and be able to trade and have a welcoming space. And I think that this motion and the work that officers have done behind the scenes does go away to addressing that as well. So I think, very supportive, and looking forward to the lessons that we can learn from this in terms of looking at our tech notes and making sure that we are making our public spaces welcoming and inclusive for everyone, and supportive of the public toilet being open 24 hours, and looking forward to that trial too. Thanks.
Councillors? I'll just say something first. Homelessness terrifies us. It terrifies us when we see it because we can't respond to it or relate to it. It terrifies us because it could happen to us or people that we love, and we, again, wouldn't know how to respond to it or relate to it. Now, it terrifies the traders who are down the street. It terrifies people with little kids who are down the street. When this is not your lived experience, it's very hard to relate to, and it's also very hard to respond to. And I think that the level of passion and emotion that's been shown here in the chamber really identifies what a complex problem this is and how hard it is for us to resolve. For me personally, as soon as former Councillor Thompson alerted me to the situation with the hostile architecture, she's done eons of work around homelessness and housing. It's her life's work. And literally the day after she told me what had happened at the mall with the armrests, two of the councillors from this place late at night after a briefing went out an exit here and someone was sleeping in a dark corner. So literally what happened immediately is someone was moved to a dark corner out of a space that the council has spent, quite a lot of hours trying to activate and respond to. Now, I think that the motion that we're dealing with is reasonable enough in terms of a compromise that it can get passed through the chamber, which is the ultimate thing that's really important to acknowledge. But it's also very important to acknowledge that people are sleeping in the Coburg Mall right now. They've just got their legs over the armrest. I've had several photos sent to me of people sleeping there right now. So the problem is not going away with or without the armrest. The problem is much more complex and needs a completely different level of undertaking for us to be able to resolve it. And I think it's admirable that even though this is not our responsibility, we're responding to it because we run the city. So it's one of our public places, partnership with the local police, supporting Vincent Care, supporting the people who are sleeping rough down there by, having walkthroughs 3 times a week. I know that one of the council officers from this place, although I think they're not here anymore, was ultimately saved a person's life who was sleeping rough down there because of a complication with diabetes and potential amputation or something. So it's a complex and emotional problem that all of us would love to fix. And I think it's very important that the motion gets through. And I think, there were several councillors working on what the motion ended up looking like and a lot of officers as well. I think that opening the public toilet, which is the XLU in the Coburg Library wall, is important because in terms of what we're allowed to do with the money that we spend through motions in the chamber, that comes under, a 6-month trial comes under a figure that we're allowed to spend because of the cleaning costs. So initially the request was to open the bigger toilet block, and that was changed because we would have only been able to ask for a report about the costs of keeping that toilet block open. This way we have a trial which, if this is passed, it will happen. I think that the report that we need to hear back, we can then respond to, and if it does need to be changed or addressed, and we do need to consult with a disability working group, which Councillor Bolton is a member of and I've been a member of since I was elected to council, then that will happen because it's what we do here. Councillor Bolton, would you like to respond?
I would like to say something brief to close the debate. I'm not going to go over all of the issues which have been canvassed tonight, which I canvassed earlier in moving the motion. I would just like to point out that point 3 of the motion recognises that the design of public space and infrastructure can cause discrimination against homeless people. And so, that point should inform any report that comes back about reviewing the technical specifications for street furniture and public spaces and so forth. So I think, I think the Moreland Council needs to take a sort of stand against this kind of hostile architecture. I was aware of this trend in councils and governments and corporations over a number of years, but I didn't realise until recently it actually had a name, or a name had been coined, of hostile architecture, but it's very illustrative of actually what this style of architecture is, designed to chase people away from public areas. So I'd just like, hopefully, it would be great if the motion could be unanimous, and I'd encourage people to vote for it.
Okay, so I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? And I'd like that recorded as unanimous. I think it's important to note that that was recorded as unanimous. This is the council that we are. Okay, so we'll get back to the agenda. DCF 7119, amendments C192 and C193, Brunswick Activities Centre Industrial Land Rezoning Decision Gateway 1, Authorisation Exhibition, Council Action Plan Item D19. Yes. Councillor Martin.
I'm happy to move officer recommendation of this report.
I just need to declare
to it next.
Yep.
Yep, thank you.
That I have a potential perceived conflicting personal interest on this matter.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Yes. So, all those in favour of allowing Councillor Dorney to leave the room?
We need to vote on that.
Oh, we don't need to vote. Yeah.
Voted on that before.
We don't need to vote on that.
Oh, personal interest.
Okay. Thank you, Sally. All those in favour? Against?
Yeah, you're good.
Declare that carried.
I don't think we need to vote on that.
Okay. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Martin. A seconder? Councillor Riley. Thank you. Councillor Martin, would you like to speak?
Yes, I'm going to speak briefly to the item. So I'm a little bit disappointed that all the people that were here for homelessness have all walked out just as we're about to start talking about affordable housing in the city. But what this amendment is doing, and what originally, and I'll ask councillor to my left to please be quiet while I'm speaking. What we're seeking to do here is we're seeking to provide affordable housing in our city, and also seeking to provide commercial spaces in our city, and seeking to make sure that as the city is redeveloped, that we don't lose those employment generating areas of our city. And originally what happened as part of this was that we decided as a council that if the people that were trying to, if the rezoning was taking place, if they were able to provide 20% affordable housing and 30% commercial space in their buildings, that they were able to transfer to a commercial one zone. If not, they were to transfer to a 50% commercial, 50% residential. And so what that is doing in our city is making sure that as the city develops, there are places for people to be employed. And it is also making sure that we don't end up with 7-8-story buildings with a little coffee shop down the bottom, and we don't actually have jobs in the city. We're trying to do mode shift here in Moreland. We're trying to get people out walking. We're trying to get people on their bikes, catching public transport. The only way you can do that is if there are jobs in the city. And so it is really important to make sure that we protect the commercial space. And I think this is a really good initiative by the state government, their commercial 3 zoning. And I think this is an appropriate number of blocks to roll this out. And so while I'm a little bit disappointed that we didn't get more affordable housing as a result of this, for all the reasons that we heard before in the previous debate, I think it is a really good outcome that we will be making sure that there are jobs in this city as the city develops over the coming decades.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Riley, would you like to speak?
Yes, I think Councillor Martin's covered some of the main points around the commercial nature and the affordable housing aspects of the proposal. There are 2 elements of this, one C193 and one C192. With the C192, it's important that the landowners be aware that there will be, if this is approved, that there will be a process for people to go through the amendment process, so there'll be further public consultation on that. And I do share Councillor Martin's disappointment around the fact that we didn't get more sign up to affordable housing with the C1Z offers that were out there, but it's had to be a lot of discussions with the owners, the property owners and so on. I think this is a good move forward for us in trying to get yet another mix of housing, employment and commercial operations. So I commend the recommendation and the amendments to be put forward.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Any other councillors like to speak?
I have an amendment.
Councillor Tapanos, would you like to propose your amendment?
Yeah, that council resolved to include all 57 properties remaining in the Moreland Industrial Land Strategy 2 areas and have been the subject of an independent panel process recommending Commercial 1 zone to Attachment 2 in this report, regardless of any Section 173 agreement. As part of the amendment C192, requests that the Minister for Planning prepares, adopts and approves Moreland Planning Scheme Amendment 1 C192 pursuant to Section 204 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987 and shown as amendment attachment 2 to this report, with the inclusion of all 57 properties remaining in the Moreland Industrial Land Strategy 2 areas.
I didn't put the motion. You need to ask the mover and seconder.
No, it's not.
I don't think it's not.
Do you have a seconder for your amendment?
I'm happy to second it.
Councillor Carly Hannon?
Thank you. Councillors, this is a very complex piece of work, but a very important one, as it details how we implement our Miles strategy, which we undertook a number of years ago. Now, we began a process that involved all of those properties in Miles 2 to transition over to Commercial 1 zone with an emphasis on employment. And we had a way of doing that. Subsequently, we've had a new zone, which in many ways I believe is untested, and that is the commercial free zone, which mandates 50% must be commercial, and there is no room to move. Must be commercial, mandatory, 50% of all developments on areas like Albert Street and Albion Street in Brunswick. I think that zone is not an appropriate one in these areas, and I think that the justification, as we heard from the speaker in the gallery, is not there for it. And I'll tell you what, I think if you mandate 50%, what will happen and the outcomes that will happen, you would see developers seeking more heights, so they will come and say, we want a 5th, 6th, and 8th, 9th story. You would see developers try to close the financial gap by having less ESD and less quality designs, because all the surplus money that they would possibly be trying to make has to be squeezed into providing commercial properties. Commercial areas that is not required in these areas off Lygon Street and off Sydney Road. Contrary to what I've heard today, this is counter affordable housing. This is not supportive of affordable housing. When you say in your development you must build 50% commercial, you are closing the possibility of people doing affordable housing. So it is contrary to what you want to achieve. And you may say that that's not true for 2 out of 57 will be doing affordable housing. That's not a good outcome. I rather take developments that happen, developments that could facilitate affordable housing, good quality design, and within our height limits. To achieve that, this zone is not appropriate. It would all the community benefits will only be going to commercial where there is no real need in these areas. Thirdly, I like to also talk about process. We've begun a process, we've abandoned it at the last minute after an independent panel has reviewed it and said send it to the Minister. We've abandoned it and we've said no, we're not going to do that. We've added a more complex process with agreements, and then we've said we've got to start this again for a zone which is untested, which the feasibility study says it hasn't been modelled on large sites, it hasn't been modelled on sites of 5 or more. Councillors, I think the proper thing to do is let all of these properties, as originally planned, go to C1, and then if you want to utilise the C3 zone, do more strategic work and apply it into the future.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Can I just double check? Thank you. There you go. Can I just double check for the sake of governance? Are you adding this point or replacing it with something? Are you proposing that this is an additional point?
Yeah, it's an additional point, but I guess it would replace, if you give us a second, It would replace dot point 2, and if adopted, it would make dot points 4, 5, and 6 redundant.
And Olivia, sorry, Councillor Carly Hannon, that's fine for you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just clarifying. Would you like to speak to the proposed amendment?
Okay, sure. So I'll just first state that I wasn't actually at the May meeting, so I haven't been part of the entire process here. I guess the concerns that that are apparent to me is the fact that it hasn't really been tested with the new commercial zone, and the idea of 50% in areas that are not the particular precincts. I'm concerned about, having grown up in an area that is industrial, that moved to, obviously a lot of those big warehouses did then become the commercial spaces. A lot of the industrial parts may have headed further north to other locations. I do definitely support those interfaces with commercial. I also support, my local butcher in Reynard Street when everybody else is going to the supermarket, for example. But the problem is at 50%, we haven't really looked at what is actually going to be the commercial use that these people can actually build there. And I think we need to do a little bit more work before we start legislating this.
Thank you. I just need to double check with the Director of City Futures if it works to make such substantial changes. You might just want to vote against it.
Through the Mayor, the difficulty with the way it's phrased and turning it back to commercial one zone is Council abandoned that amendment back in November last year, and once you abandon an amendment, you can't return to it. You would have to commence a new amendment.
I believe the motion as drafted talks about amendment C192, which is a new amendment proposed.
Yeah, but the technical nature of turning it to a commercial one zone, those properties, they were dropped out of and abandoned in the previous decision around 164. So it's a technicality, but it is a process, and it's actually not possible to do that with amendments. You have to start a whole new amendment.
But correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that this is starting a whole new amendment called C192, and I guess, yes, those properties, those 55 out of 57 properties did drop out. What I'm saying is that they should be included in a new amendment process, which is what the wording is.
No, I'm sorry, if I've read that you are recommending that the Minister prepares, adopts and approves. You don't do that with a new amendment. You prepare one and you seek authorisation. With the way 192 is written, because it can proceed, because it's previously been at a panel, it can be approved. So you're mixing two processes. I'm sorry, this is... I provided an advice earlier today which indicated that this was not possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so what I need to do is let the amendment lapse. What based on he said he disagrees with the director's view. Yeah, it's technical information from, maybe.
No, Ross, you could take up the part about for the minister for planning.
Okay, I'm happy to remove from that point request that the Minister for Planning prepares. I'm happy to remove that. That's copy pasted council directly out of the officer's report, but yeah, I'm happy to remove that if that's fine.
Does that make any difference?
I'm sorry, this kind of drafting is not something you can just do on the spot. I need to look at all the other recommendations as well. I'd suggest that there's
maybe defer it then.
Another way of handling it.
Defer it. I'm happy to defer it.
Okay.
So that's a procedural motion.
It is a procedural motion. Thank you, Councillor Davidson. You're right. So there's been a procedural motion that we defer this. If we could put that to the vote. Sorry, can I get a mover and seconder? Who proposed a deferral?
No, I've proposed an amendment.
I just raised it as a way forward, but I'm not really particularly arguing for a deferral. I just thought...
Okay, we're in a formal council meeting and this is a bit of a debacle. So we need to sort of think about the process here. And I think that the amendment is, especially considering the complexity and history of this particular motion, is way too complex to be dealt with on the floor. So I'll propose that it's deferred. And I need a seconder, please, for the proposal. Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Put that to the vote. All those in favour of deferring this? Against? And that's deferred on the casting vote. No, it's not. It's just lost. It's deferred. It's just what the deferral was one.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So we will defer this particular motion, this particular report, until the next meeting, and we'll move on. And what I'm going to do is bring forward the contract DCI 1619, contract 828T, drainage upgrade works at Michael Street and Saxon Street, Brunswick. And thank you so much for your patience, Christian and everybody else. I don't know if Stephen and who else is waiting still, but thank you. Councillor Bolton's happy to move. Councillor Riley's happy to second. Oh, welcome back, Councillor Dorney. Sorry. Would you like to speak, Councillor Bolton?
This motion, for people who are watching on screen and not sure what it's all about, it's about issuing a contract for works to be done to resolve flooding issues in Michael Street. It's sort of close to the intersection of Michael Street and Saxon Street in Brunswick. And there's been an issue of ongoing flooding of this street because the drainage there is totally insufficient. And what it has led to is one of the buildings, residential apartment blocks in that building, the flooding coming in through the foyer as well as through the car park. And so that people, such as Christian and other people, being stranded many floors up in this apartment building, unable to come down because the lifts stop working once the water starts to go into the lifts. But also, as the gentleman referred to earlier, someone parked his car, went to the nearby pub, torrential rain, came back, and you couldn't actually see the gutters, the drains, and he fell into one of those drains and he came close to drowning. So this is urgent works, and apparently people in the area have been complaining for years of local businesses, but it's become worse. And so I certainly commend it to you. The residents have been pushing for action on this for a few years, and it's great that we're at the action point, and once we award the contract, the work will get done.
Thank you. Councillor Riley?
Thanks. Yeah, I concur with Councillor Bolton's comments. Thank you, Councillor Bolton. I'd just like to add that part of the reason for this problem with this building is because of the private contract and surveying nature of the business. And had we had better standards and controls over that, it may have never been built in a way that allowed floodwaters to get down into the basement. So that's part of the context. And that the private nature of building surveyors and what's the other term? People who approve cladding and so on has been under a lot of scrutiny lately, and we need to really look at that as councils and as a Victorian government issue. So that's one thing. The other is that a lot of the Michael Street will be dug up to allow 430 cubic metres of water to be sort of pulled down underneath the road and then evacuated after the storm moves. It won't won't address every flooding problem, but it'll address some of the more the lower to medium range. I'm not too sure of exactly how many flooding incidents it will address, but it'll have a large impact. And some of the other works we're doing around providing a bit of a concrete wall or a low floor wall to actually buffer the water getting into the building is also an important part of this. I was just hoping we might be able to grab some of that water for some other use, but that's another problem we'll face in the future. But I'm really pleased that we're getting progress on this, and I'm hoping we can tell you soon, residents, when we'll do that. But that's, as Greg said earlier, it'll be in a matter of months, hopefully.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against this motion? No. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And I declare that carried unanimously. Thank you very much. No, just make a declaration. Okay, DCF 7219, Amendment C174, Moreland Heritage Gap Study Decision Gateway 3, consideration of panel report and decision on the amendment council plan item. Do I have a mover? Councillor Kavanagh, and a seconder? Councillor Riley? See you tomorrow, Christian.
Look, I'm aware that whenever we put properties on heritage listings, it can be a controversial thing, but I must say I'm pleased that we have. I think this brings to almost about 2,000 properties in the time that I've been on council. Go back to 2007 and 8 with Councillor Joe Cannellan at that stage, who was a portfolio councillor, just over 1,000 properties, and this one 476 properties. And the fact is that they are controversial, and there are people that disagree with it, as we've heard earlier tonight, and many councils avoid it. Many councils say, oh no, we won't do that, we don't upset people, etc., we'll leave it. But in fact, I think in many years to come, that will be regretful. I'm sure many of us wish that the top end of Collins Street was still the way it was in the 1950s and 60s. When you see footage of that, you think, wow, what a lost opportunity. So these properties here, over 470 properties now to be heritage listed, including a number of precincts. I'm sure people will look back in 50, 60 years' time and believe the council did the right thing. And so I commend the report to you.
Councillor Riley?
Yeah, I'm just to concur with that. I want to thank all the people who've been in touch about this, and I know it causes some concern for property owners. Hopefully, yes, it may actually impose some extra conditions, assuming this gets through, but it will also add some values to your property, even though you may have to go through some other hurdles in terms of making adjustments to them. It doesn't stop you from being able to do work on your property, but it will put in place some other measures that you have to go through to get approvals if you're upgrading or changing your property. And I think it is an important public, something that we get a lot of requests for when we have planning decisions coming to us. So it's really important from that aspect. There is one property that's going to be decided through VCAT process. So there's two parts of this. A property at Lygon Street will be considered as a part 2, and so there are ways of dealing with certain properties, and that's one way we've done that. We believe we did contact them and let them know. However, in the interest of procedural justice, we're more than happy to support this process so that they get a fair hearing through the VCAT. And I think that this is an important step in protecting the heritage of our city. So I commend it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against this motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Could we have that recorded as unanimous, please? Thank you.
Mayor, might I ask if we bring forward the AEF report,
Certainly.
given the CEO's in the gallery?
Absolutely. And I'm sorry for not acknowledging you earlier, the CEO of AEF, formerly MEFL, and also former Mayor and Councillor Higginbotham. Remiss of me not to acknowledge both of you. I'm assuming I haven't missed any other ex-councillors. AEF, let me just find a number. Okay, DCF 7419, the Australian Energy Foundation proposed changes to Constitution and proposed new 5-year funding agreement. Councillor Martin?
I have an amendment that I'd like to move on a couple of the points there, and I circulated it to councillors a little bit earlier. My apologies, it didn't get to you even earlier than that, the usual email-related problems. If I just outline the points that I'd like to amend, and then if I have a seconder, I'm happy to speak to that.
Yep.
So the following points amending the officer recommendation: in point 4, remove the word "in principle." In 4B, replace "in 2020 to 21," replace it with "per annum." Add a point 5 that states endorsing that funding allocated with base MOU and operational project zero carbon activities paid to MEFL in 2018-19 will be sought as the minimum for zero carbon Moreland actions tendered annually over the life of the MOU. Add a point 6 provides a summary of zero carbon Moreland actions tendered as a result of the reallocated funds, highlighting the current year's expenditure against 2018-19 levels as part of each year's annual budget report to the Council over the life of the MOU. And the final point is to renumber 5 to 7.
And I have a seconder for Councillor Martin's amended motion. Councillor Dorney? Councillor Martin.
So, councillors, the reason why I've moved the amendments that I have is to address a few concerns. The report actually talks about a lot of this in the detail, and I don't believe it was explicitly stated enough in the recommendation. So that's why I've brought some of the wording up, and I believe it's on page 1409 is some of the wording around the minimum expected spends. Obviously, this is subject to the annual budget process. This is just signalling our intention that we're wanting to maintain the same level of expenditure on our zero carbon Moreland activities throughout the life of the MOU. A concern that I have is that we'll see the spending, which is currently about $800,000 a year, reduced quite considerably as a measure of budget savings in the coming years. And I want this council to really state its intent in that we will continue as a minimum the current spend on zero carbon activities because we have declared a climate emergency, and we recognise the importance of these actions in this city going forward. And so, again, these statements are made throughout the document, and I'm really wanting to make this as explicit as possible for anyone who picks this up and reads this in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Dorney?
Yes, so I am obviously supporting this motion tonight. I would like to acknowledge former Mayor Mike Hill, who initially moved a motion to see that when we moved away from actually owning our own power, that we created a fund that supported us to be able to address climate change and reduce our emissions in Moreland. Here we are now, that was in 1996, here we are now in 2019 with the fabulous work that Moreland Energy Foundation Limited, otherwise known as MEFL, has done. And the formerly known, yeah, I was telling a story, formerly known as MEFL, which now is the Australian Energy Foundation, which I think tells the story quite well in how the former MEFL has grown to become AIF, the Australian Energy Foundation, and with that being able to expand its impact to both throughout Victoria but also nationally as well. So the Constitution ultimately remains the same, although they're no longer requiring our council's financial support. The objectives are still, very much the same. The Australian Energy Foundation promotes the protection of the environment by reducing greenhouse emissions through community awareness, maximising energy efficiency, promoting the use of energy efficient domestic, commercial, industrial appliances. The list goes on, but basically it's fantastic work. It's great to see that something that council has fostered for so many years is now at the point where it can be independent. I thank AEF and Alison, who is in the gallery, for your work. And yeah, I look forward to hearing what's next for AEF.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Tapanos?
Yes, thank you. this is a really big success story in many ways, and I note with disappointment that funding that was announced prior to the last campaign wasn't received because of the election result. But I got no doubt with this change in the work that they do now right across Australia, that funding will be coming through in various shapes and sizes, and hopefully more and more into the future because of the recognition that they get for the work they do. So it's a great success story we should all be proud of, but it's time in a way to let it go and let it go global and see what it can achieve. At the end of the day, when it comes to climate action, it's not just about our neck of the woods, it's not just about Moreland, although it is important that we also act really locally, but we can do so much more. And by accepting these changes today, what we're really saying is go out there because we have a greater cause, there is a greater need, and you can help, and you've got the experience to be able to do that, and we wish you all the best. But we're always here to support, and I know that there is still some money and some grants and maybe an MOU as well into the future to have a look at how we could continue to work with the Australian Energy Foundation.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. I love it when councillors in this chamber talk about climate action, so I'm awfully excited to have heard that from you, Councillor Tapanos.
Yes, a big passion of mine, Councillor Abood, the climate emergency.
Good, you can help me carry the banner. I would like to actually tip my hat to the former CEO, Dr. Nerina De Lorenzo. I don't know if she's watching at home, but, you know, here she is. You never know. I'll call her later and check. And the CEO of AEF, Alison Rowe, for the tireless hours that they've put into to be able to turn this evolution into something that is successful that we can all be proud of. I think that the integrity of the establishment of the Mike Hill Fellowship and the fact that, you know, Lorna was consulted as Mike's partner about that particular thing is something that is noble, and I think it's one of the great things that's come out of this conversation about, you know, what happens to MEFL when it turns into the AEF, which it did a few months ago. I'm very excited about the fact that this little company is becoming a bigger company but keeping its feet buried firmly in Moreland, that we will still see initiatives and exciting things happen in this city, and it is a business that is successful, that was established by the council before it was a Greens-dominated council, and I think that's really unfair to the former Labor Party councillors because Mike Hill was not a Green, and I think that the environmental attitude of this council and its progressive thinking has existed for a lot longer time than just 3 years ago. And I think that the fact that this business employs local people and will continue to do so is a fantastic credit to the people who run it. And I'm looking forward to hearing what happens next and who gets awarded some of those fellowships and what those innovation pilots that will be delivered here look like. It's an exciting time for the future of the company. Councillor Bolton?
I'd like to say something. It is great that MEFL has been such a success. It would have been good if it had been hadn't been the result of privatisation of electricity, but because the original electricity providers, which were owned by the council, actually started talking about energy conservation prior to privatisation. That whole process was stopped at that point. But it is great that MEFL has been such a success. I also think the motion is strengthened by Councillor Martin's amendments because while MEFL is spreading its wing to become a much bigger entity and working in a wide range of places on different projects, it is important that that direct involvement of council in MEFL doesn't lead to council reducing its commitment to climate action. So I think that being clear in the motion is really important. Because we need to increase our efforts in this sphere. rather than decrease or just cruise along. So, and my understanding is the idea of MEFL changing its focus was a proposal coming from MEFL, it wasn't coming from council. So it's not like council's pushed MEFL out the door, but actually it's been an initiative from MEFL to spread its wings and grow and take on projects in various states, not only in Victoria. So I think it is great, and we need to keep going on these projects.
Thank you. I'll put it to the vote. Councillor Martin?
Yeah. There's no one spoke against that.
Oh. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? And can that please be recorded as carried unanimously? Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Just find a place on this agenda to go back to. DCF 7319, the Affordable Housing Action Plan. Do I have a mover for this item? Councillor Riley, and a seconder, Councillor Bolton.
Thanks, Councillor Bolton. Yes, there's been some discussion about this report, which is pleasing to me as someone who's been working in the affordable housing space on the committee. There was some talk, just for the galleries, that we might defer this, but I think after people having interrogated the plan and what we're doing, we're seeing that there will be some annual reports and accountability, so we can actually and quarterly check-ins, so that I'm hoping people's concerns will be able to be taken on board as we go ahead for the next 4 years of this plan. So it's turning from a strategy into an action plan, and a lot of our effort will be going into the Housing Trust, and that's already on course for looking at sites across the city, and hopefully in the new year we'll have a proposal coming from Moreland Affordable Housing Limited and looking at that trust. So I encourage people to have a closer look at this. It's not a very long document. It's unlike some of the things that came to council tonight, which were a couple of reams of papers. This one's one of the briefer ones, but it is an important one given the discussion we've had about homelessness tonight. The Affordable Housing Committee takes some of that brief, and again, I want to acknowledge the work that staff have done in this space around our front of house and how we're dealing with people who are trying to look for assistance when they might have experienced domestic violence or health issues and so on, or whether they're literally sleeping in their car or wherever, in Victoria Mail. So just want to finish on a positive note around that tonight, the work that we've been doing, and thank my colleagues for their interest in this area. I look forward to us being able to get into acting on the plan.
Councillor Bolton?
Just really a couple of things. The focus of this, we've been working on trying to increase the provision of affordable housing for some years now, and we are making some progress, although it will be good to see the beginning of the buildings. But I think this action plan has 4 main focuses, and one is trying to encourage, cajole, etc., developers to include affordable housing in their developments. And that was something we talked about a bit earlier tonight. The other one, which I think, but we can't, the state planning scheme doesn't allow the council to force developers to build affordable housing as part of their schemes. It's really only persuasion, cajoling, all of that kind of thing. The thing that council has, really a lot more influence over is that we've set up a land trust, the Moreland Affordable Housing Limited, to develop affordable housing on council-owned land, and that's probably something which is much more of a direct thing that council can do, or via this land trust. And the other things more relate around advocating for increased public housing, and that's really what we desperately need to reverse, the long-term trend of government selling off public housing, and we're about to lose the Gordon Place estate in West Brunswick, unfortunately. But the last point is about building capacity for improving services for people who are homeless or in housing crisis.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against this motion? Sure.
It's good to see that the work in regards to affordable housing is continuing to progress, and Moreland is leading the charge. I note that there is a great need in the city, and there are a number of ways of tackling the problem, including having inclusionary zoning potentially into the future, but also making sure that we're supporting housing agencies to deliver more affordable housing projects, and of course our very own Moreland Affordable Housing Limited. And I just wanted to say how pleased I was the other day to see the partnership with the state government and the Women's Association for Growing Place. We heard today about the problem of homelessness and particularly the focus of those most in need, those fleeing violence at home and domestic violence. And it was great to see that those partnerships are going to make a real difference. And I know from speaking to some residents from Growing Place actually how much they're looking forward to the redevelopment of that. And I had an opportunity to actually walk through it the other day and just to see the condition it's in and the condition that those new housing dwellings will provide is just really amazing. So congratulations to the state government for getting a project like that to this stage, and I really look forward to its opening over the next year and a half.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Good segue. Thought you might.
So I'd like to just quickly touch on the fact that it's quite fitting the way this has come in the agenda, along with discussions around rezoning and around heritage. And I think it's really important, and we have a really challenging job as the council of this municipality to look at how we balance all of these factors and looking at ways that we can actually have affordable social public housing in amongst, recognising that heritage homes often will be ones that get redeveloped in ways that then become unaffordable to many. I'd also like to talk slightly about those relationships that we are building with the community housing sector, and to congratulate Women's Housing Limited on having secured the appointment of the rental manager for Growing Place, recognising that 111 of those dwellings will be public housing with the right of return for those residents who were there, and also recognising that they're actually going to be buying 8 new units for social housing, and that these houses are for some single women fleeing domestic violence, and that we're actually seeing a rise of women who are becoming homeless. So all the issues we've discussed tonight, perfectly packaged into this one motion. Thank you.
Well done, Councillor Carley-Henry. Thank you. You're absolutely right. I totally agree. Are there any councillors that would like to speak? No. Put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Okay. EMF 3019, draft financial and performance statements 2018-19. Councillor Riley,
Yeah,
your
thanks.
hand.
Yeah, I just want to remove the officer recommendation.
And a seconder? I'll second it. Councillor Dorney.
Thank you,
Go
Councillor
for it.
Dorney. Just briefly, these are our financial statements for the last financial year, 18-19, and they're quite good figures if anyone would like to cast an eye on them. We're getting a book, an accounting surplus on the books of over 23 million, but we're essentially also taking 4 million of that and putting it towards our significant project reserve, which is really important for us in terms of being able to deliver our future capital works programs and some of our big goals on our council plan, things like Wheatsheaf Hub, Faulkner pool upgrade, and eventually the site works in Saxon Street, and those kinds of projects which are still needing significant funding, but this will go towards that. I just want to note that we've experienced in this past year a decrease in the contributions that have been coming through from open space, for our open space, and that's partly due to some of the impacts in terms of developments. There are many other figures in here. I won't pull them all out, but one of the exciting parts is that we're putting more money into our capital works program in the last year. So that has seen some great outcomes in terms of the land that we've been able to acquire this year, the open space we've acquired. Of course, our Oak Park Sports and Aquatic Facilities was also being settled through this last year, even though we opened it during the year, it's still being settled. And just to finally wrap up that our Victorian Auditor General Office sustainability ratios are looking quite good. They're all coming up green, particularly for long-term indicators. They're all coming up green except for the renewal gap, which is on amber. So I encourage people to have a look at that, and we'll still need to keep our fingers on the levers in terms of making sure that we bring those into the green if possible. But there are lots of challenges for us in the future in terms of our plans and where we want to go and where we're going to get the money from, and whether we need to exercise more loans and so on to be able to achieve our goals. So they're all things that we're looking at and trying to balance up at the moment. So I commend all the officers, particularly the finance team and all of the directors in the units for their efforts in getting great results, and to the acting CEO as well. Thank you.
Well spoken. Councillor Dorney?
No, I think Councillor Riley's covered.
I just want to add one quick thing. The shape of the books is how we were able to bring forward the money that was required to address Michael Street. And I think it's, a credit to the people who deal with the finances in this place. So it's good to have a bit of flexibility. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against this motion? No? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. DCD 2219, Revised Guidelines for Arts Investment Grants Program. Councillor Riley.
I'm a bit tired of speaking, but I'll do it because I've got the arts portfolio. So just very briefly, I just want to support this and thank the officers for their work in this area. It's doing some tidying up.
I'll just get a seconder.
Oh, thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. So we're looking at streamlining some of our processes for artists in terms of applying for their grants and so on. There's a commitment to supporting our investment program for small and emerging arts organisations. We wanted to build on that, and I just would encourage people to have a look at it and see what we are planning to do for the next year. But I'll leave it at that rather than speak without much purpose, except to say that the third round is coming up, and I just want to thank the officers for making it more amenable to people who are coming in line, and you can use our officers to help you put these submissions in. That's what they're there for, so please access them if you're considering putting in a further submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Riley. Councillor Martin, would you like to speak?
Nothing.
Any councillors like to speak against? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. DCD 2319, Summer 2019-2020 Sports Ground Seasonal Tenancy Allocations. Councillor Kavanagh, thank you.
Move the officer recommendation, please.
And a seconder, please. Councillor Martin.
Just to point out that, yes, basically we're full as far as grounds go for summer allocation, and that's the first point. So, it's a balancing act to make sure that grounds aren't overused as well, to make sure that they are still in good condition, and also that this is the first occasion that every single cricket club that's given a summer allocation has at least one female team and one junior team. So our policy that was adopted some 11 years ago is now bearing fruit with every single club being compliant.
Excellent. Councillor Martin?
That is exactly what I was going to say.
Seconded. Anyone like to speak against? No, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Declare that carried. Look at us go. Okay. DBT 1819, the Governance Report, September 2019. Cyclical or cyclical report. Councillor Carly Hannon. Councillor Davidson. Councillor Carly Hannon, would you like to speak to it? No? Councillor Davidson?
I've got yep. Which might be acceptable, possibly. And that is to add an extra point that the wording in the election policy report The sentence which currently reads public question time will be suspended during the election period be amended to read public question time will be suspended during the election period. Public question time will be allowed during the election period with only council officers being allowed to reply to questions. At the moment, it's basically deleting question time altogether.
Yep.
And so I'd like to allow amends for there to be, for public not to be penalised while not giving councillors standing as candidates special
That doesn't go
privileges.
against any kind of, no.
From a governance perspective?
Given the tick.
I'll just also quickly note that thank you for the caretaker period to Granthorne. I think you're doing an excellent job, and I think Councillor Leiter, thank you for that period that you're doing.
Will not be suspended.
Can I just ask, is the intent of the policy to prevent candidates from grandstanding from question time or councillors?
No, that's a good question.
Well, both, I guess. It's one and the same time sometimes.
Yes, I think that's a very good point.
What was that?
I do think, can I speak to it?
Yes.
I do think that, I think Councillor Tapanos made a good point. Originally, I thought that was a very good motion by Councillor Bolton, but I think sitting councillors could be hamstrung while people in the public gallery who are who are declared candidates can ask questions that are, don't have the same limitations in the chamber. So basically one of the candidates has their hands tied behind the back while the other candidates don't. I think that's a problem.
And remarkable that sitting in the chamber you would have your hands tied, whereas sitting in the gallery you wouldn't.
Yeah, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Explain my reason.
Please do. Yes, please do.
I mean, I sort of feel like, sure, yes, that is a risk, definitely. But I sort of feel like sometimes in the question period, people come with all sorts of issues. Maybe they haven't got satisfaction over an issue. Maybe it might be a new issue, might be an emergency issue. And by not allowing any question time at all, you prevent the opportunity of being able to resolve, council being able to resolve that issue. Because sometimes people don't get resolution through emailing council officers and emailing councillors. Might be, things might get lost in transmission, maybe they don't explain it so well in the email, whereas, being able to come face to face, at least people can ask a question, it puts a face to it. People do often give more information when they're talking verbally about an issue. So that was my motivation. While, yes, I know some people could use it to grandstand and all of that, but I sort of feel like people with genuine questions shouldn't be penalised by other people.
So if I can just,
Acceptable to,
it is?
yeah.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually take it out of the rest of the governance report and just vote on it separately for the sake of the governance report.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that my wording?
And let's just, double check the wording. So while Councillor Bolton's just sorting that out.
Can you just say declared candidates, not ask questions? Yes.
Yeah, is this?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a bit of.
Could do that.
Yeah, that's fine with me as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just check with governance.
Through the mayor, the intent of the clause is not aimed at councillors or candidates at all. The intent of the clause is to prevent council from publishing electoral matter, which would be anything that might be, any subject that might be raised, that then becomes a subject of debate and the election. So it's not particularly about candidates or councillors at all.
Okay, Councillor Kavanagh.
Can I say, I accept that, but in the past we have had experience, definitely, of declared candidates basically campaigning via a question in the election period.
So Dorothy, did
And they absolutely have. And I think that is, and I agree that in the fact that there's fairness for sitting councillors and fairness for prospective councillors. So I accept the officer that wasn't the intention, but I think we can make sure that we avert that problem too by adopting prospective councillors are not allowed to ask questions, and councillors are not allowed to answer them at that time.
Okay, so what I'd like to do, just for the sake of the debate, because it's become a little bit informal, is I put the first half of that motion to the vote. So all those in favour of everything else that's part of the governance report. Against, declare that carried. And then, so we've had a couple of speakers to this last point. That's totally fine. I feel like you've spoken to it as well, Councillor Bolton.
Read out the wording, because I realise.
Is it different to what's up there?
I accidentally sent through I must have done a copy and paste and made a mistake with what I sent through. Will be allowed during
Modified during the election period.
Oh, modified, okay.
Yes, that's the word we use.
Modified during the election period, so that only council officers will respond to questions from people who are not candidates.
Okay, so
Tabernas suggested. Yeah.
Okay, so from my perspective, I wouldn't support this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would prefer that question time is suspended. I do have faith, especially sitting in the mayoral office, in the fact that there is access for community to officers and councillors who are finishing the end of the term ultimately. And I understand and I commend the intent because transparency is something that's always been a priority of yours, Councillor Bolton. But I'm not concerned with that so much as concerned about the 20, 40, 60 or 70 candidates who will be running a very competitive, highly contested, important election for everybody who's involved, and the inevitable games that do get played, and people in this room have been victim of those games when it's an election cycle. So I think for the sake of the chamber and whoever will be the mayor during that period, I think it's better to suspend question time during that short period, and I won't be supporting that amended motion. Would anyone like to speak in support of it? Would you like me to put it to the vote? Okay, so all those in favour of point 5? Against? I declare that lost. I'd like to propose then the original point 5, since that was lost, and I should have foreshadowed it, but I actually didn't think it would be lost. And if I could, Councillor Kavanagh to second, thank you. I'm just happy to support the initial intention of this particular item as part of the governance during the election period. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against it? Councillor Kavanagh, would you like to speak to it?
Just that I think it's probably the safest way. I think at that time, and so therefore I'm supportive of it.
Thank you. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Thank you. Okay. Done that. So DCI 1519, contract 826T, road and Bluestain Laneway reconstruction of Henkel Street, Brunswick. Do I have a mover? Councillor Tabernas and Councillor Riley. Councillor Tabernas, would you like to speak to it?
No, it's getting quite late.
It's early. Put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Okay, we've done DCI 1619, so DBT 1919, Collaborative Procurement Public Liability Insurance. I have a mover? Councillor Kavanagh, and a seconder? Happy to second. Abood. Councillor Kavanagh, would you like to speak to it? No. I'll also reserve the right to speak, so I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. Okay. DBT 2019, provision of temporary labour hire, neutral vendor managed services, a collaboration of the Northern Region Group of Councils. I have a mover, please. I'm happy to move it. Councillor Riley, just second. Sorry, I missed all the hands. I thought nobody was going to. So me and Councillor Riley and I. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Riley? I'll put that to vote. All those in favour? Against, declare that carried. DEP 919, level crossing removals, heritage works application, site establishment works at Moreland Station. Councillor Bolton, thank you. And a seconder, Councillor Dorney. Councillor Bolton, would you like to speak to it?
No, I will speak to it. I think this motion tonight sort of builds on some of the motions we've moved in council meetings just recently, where I think council has strengthened its position with regard to the level crossing removal. This particular motion is a response. It was included in the agenda quite late, mainly because the Level Crossing Authority wants to basically use Gandolfo Gardens and bulldoze most of the trees, including a large number of, in fact, the majority of the old mature trees for construction purposes, but also for storage of machinery, etc., etc. So, I mean, the guts of this motion is basically calling on this motion from council, which is a submission to Heritage Victoria, is basically saying we're not convinced of the justification to remove these trees and we don't want the trees removed. We also are calling for Moreland Station to be moved south so that Gandolfo Gardens can be saved. I mean, Gandolfo Gardens was a result of a community campaign to build a community parkland in the area, a community garden, around 100 years ago. And so some of these trees are over 100 years old. So this is, I won't go on longer about this, but this is in reality a heritage kind of park. So I think this motion also talks about the preservation of the signal box, and I think it's a very good resolution with which includes an attachment from the Heritage Council's Heritage Advisor. So I think we don't really agree with all of the rationale from LXRP for the way it intends to do its work, and we don't agree with their application for a heritage permit for this work.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Councillor Dorney?
Yeah, I think that Councillor Bolton has covered it quite well. But we know that these trees are of hugely significant cultural, social and environmental value for our community. We've known that for a long time, but particularly there's been a large campaign from the community around saving Gandolfo Gardens. This report, I think the officers have done really well. It's built on what our policy position is in terms of actually analysing the position of removing these trees, which is what ultimately the government, LXRP, are wanting to do, remove most of the trees, which there's so many huge canopy trees, which their council have actually estimated is $1.1 million in loss of amenity through the removal of these trees. It doesn't align with policy. So it's been, I recommend people going and having a look at the report. There is a lot of detail there, but basically it's saying that there is no real justification as to why these trees should be removed. It's only if it ultimately there's no other option that we need to start thinking about compromising the trees, and it's not at that stage yet. There's still definitely lots more options to be considered, which Councillor Bolton has alluded to. So, we definitely are not in favour of removing the trees, which is good.
Councillor Dorney, thank you. Any other councillors like to speak? I just want to state that considering the state of all of the things and, potentially the federal government has supported a climate emergency today at the Parliament, we can hope. I know that I got a message from my local MP who responded to me saying that they think they've got the words together, which is promising, that the state government is chopping down important trees left, right and centre. It makes no sense to me. You know, the trees at Ararat have been the talk of the town today because people are moving in there to pull those trees down. I just don't understand why you wouldn't go above and beyond to find an alternative to destroying significant trees. And I find it bizarre that it's 2019 and so many countries across the world and, you know, certainly for us and many other councils declaring climate emergency and hearing that drawing down carbon is a way to do that is planting trees, that trees would be getting chopped down. The implications are bizarre. I just don't understand it. So I want to say thank you to probably Richard and whoever else collaborated with him and obviously the Director of Engagement and Partnerships for their work pulling this together. It hasn't been around for a long time, and so getting, again, the submission together to this latest application to destroy something as part of the LXRP project has been responded to in an admirable way, I think. And I think that it's important to mention everyone from the community as well who have got together, rounded the wagons and made their own submissions to this work, and I hope that it's a strong enough voice and that the LXRP understands that while we're very grateful for the project, although it does seem a little bit car-centric to me, of the LXRP crossing removals, it shouldn't come at such an extreme cost. And so I will absolutely be wholeheartedly supporting this motion. Are there any other councillors that would like to speak? Councillor Davidson.
Briefly to add to that. So right now there's an interim protection order in place, and I think this is the time when the community and council really need to work on consolidating what we're putting. And also the fact is that we have got so many action plans and strategies that fall in line with the position of not removing these trees. And if, as my fellow councillor said, Councillor Dorney, if there's an alternate strategy, that needs to be fully explored and investigated. So, you know, I can just rattle off a few. Council's very own action plan, that open space strategy from 2012 to 2022, the urban forest strategy, Moreland Heat Island effect, the cooling the upfield line corridor action plan. So there are so many policies and values that council hold, and the removal of these trees goes against every single one of those. So if there's an alternate, that fully needs to be explored. This interim protection order is protecting those trees for now, and we need to use that time.
Well spoken. So I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? And if that can be recorded as unanimous, please. Okay, now we'll move to the... No, I've mixed up my papers. Oh, we are moving to the notices of motion. Okay. Sorry, I think I've mixed up my papers. Is this you, Sue? 4819?
This one is
4719.
Sorry. Let me just find it around the shop. Oh, you know what you're doing, Councillor.
4719.
Councillor Dorney. 4719.
Moreland Global Construct.
And I just sent through some additional words a little bit earlier as well.
Thank you.
Just wait. So there's no additional points, but it's just some additional wording so that one now reads, publicly declares its support for the global climate strike on the 20th of September 2019, including promoting the event on council's social media channels. And then number 3 now reads, what I'm proposing is encourages and supports community participation by inviting local workplaces, in particular. No, that's not right.
That's what I've done.
What's that? Sorry. Sorry, bear with me.
It's all right, take your time. We've still got an hour, Jess.
Sorry, I'm really...
No pressure.
There's nothing worse than trying to find something under pressure.
No pressure like time pressure.
Okay. So encourages and supports community participation by inviting local workplaces, and then in brackets, including... Yeah.
So not in particular, just including council contractors.
Including council staff in their own time and council contractors, close bracket, and then the rest reads the same.
Neighbouring councils and schools to participate in the club, yeah.
So the social media has sort of moved up because that was all bunched together as well. The seconder? Or?
I'm happy to second it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Aboud. It's great to be able to, I was contacted by the Global Climate Strike. Gina, I believe it was, a young person who is contacting local councils and seeking support for what is now known as the Global Climate Strike. I'm not sure when it actually started, but it's growing by the masses daily. We're in the middle of a social movement, and it's great to see that the young people are really holding the baton for that right now, and I wholeheartedly support the work that they're doing. All good social movements require resource and investment and not giving up. And sometimes some of us want to give up. We want to give up when governments try to pretend that there isn't an issue. We potentially want to give up when we're told that climate change maybe doesn't exist and that maybe we need to keep coal going in our economy because we need it, which is simply not true. We know there is a renewable energy future. There's plenty of places and examples where that's working and that's working well. We can create jobs and we can make sure that if we do it now, we can support a just transition. Climate change and the connection that has to people's health and social equity is intrinsically linked. And that's what me as a health worker, as a public health worker, has really drawn me to this issue. They're saying that the impacts of climate change are going to be the biggest public health threat of the 21st century. We're looking at climate migrants and climate refugees, people that can no longer stay in their homes because of rising sea levels, people that can no longer stay in their homes because they burn down. The mass influx of people having to move into places that are actually habitable is going to between like 50 million people by 2050. Like, it's insane. We know we have the solutions. We know what we can do. We need to have a united voice, and I'm glad to be able to, have my part as a councillor in helping promote this event as one way in supporting, the social movement that we need essentially, and just to get on with the job of taking the action and reducing our emissions, both within Moreland, but also realising that think local, think global, act local. Thank you for the young people. Look forward to seeing you on September 20 at Treasury Gardens.
Thank you, Councillor Dorney. As a seconder, I'd like to add at 2 p.m, and I'll be holding a big Moreland banner, Moreland Council, and everybody is welcome. Councillor Tapanos and I will be carrying it together, because Councillor Tapanos wants climate action just like the rest of us.
Diary availability.
I will be.
This is, it's make or break time with this stuff, and I think that the fact that young people are leading the charge, with these climate strikes is really indicative of how serious the problem is and who it affects. Because I know that for me personally, I was, dragged along to all these demos as a kid, and I honestly believe that that's how it should be, and that the kids should be like, I don't want to go to another demo. Not, come on, you have to come to this demo because this is our future that we're talking about. The last student strike for climate that happened, I went to and just spent the whole time bawling, and I'm not a person who cries often or easily. So I think it's devastating, and there's not many things that young people will ask me to do that I'll do, but this is definitely at the top of the list. So I commend Councillor Dorney's motion, and I suspect it'll be supported unanimously. Councillor Bolton?
Yeah, I'd like to amend point 3 to read, and I sent through the amendment earlier, but I didn't realise new words were going to be put forward. So after the brackets, or the beginning of the section in the middle of the brackets, to read including indicating to council staff who wish to participate that they can participate without penalty or loss of pay, and encouraging council contractors. Brackets.
I think there's an issue with this in terms of the remuneration, because if we're spending over $5,000, like there's a governance issue, because if we have more than $5,000 worth of staff walking out of their jobs, like what we're doing is pledging to spend an amount of money that may be well and truly above and beyond what we're allowed to as part of the meeting procedure local laws to spend. So there's a technical problem, I think. Can I just check that?
Yeah. So
I also think it's out of the realm.
Hang on a sec.
So there are three
Just
elements
going for
to
the
that.
technicalities.
One is it potentially a notice of motion only allows a spend of up to $5,000. So that amendment potentially goes above that. Two, that's an operational decision of which council, is
doesn't oversee
going into the realms of, and the Fair Work Act would override a decision of council in this regard.
Just raise a couple of things in response.
Yeah.
So I'm aware of at least one other council which is allowing staff to attend, not necessarily in their own time. And also there's a number of universities that are allowing staff to attend without loss of pay.
Yep.
And there's also a number of private businesses who are allowing staff to attend without loss in pay. So my understanding is that bit of the Fair Work Act refers to industrial action. It doesn't refer to political action, like this would be a political action. So that's my understanding.
The issue is that within our meeting procedure local law, we can't spend or pledge to spend over $5,000.
Well,
So
then maybe we can amend it to say staff up to the amount of $5,000.
Well, then there's a complication about which staff get to be paid to go strike.
Maybe the first people who apply.
It's not acceptable.
Anyway, if there's no seconders, it lapses. But I think.
Look, I a little while ago had this conversation with the acting CEO, also known as the
Point of order. Is there a seconder or not? I mean, it's not time for a conversation. Sorry, Mayor, but
well, I can't second it because I seconded the motion.
it lapses. I'm not sure.
I want to have a second.
Is anyone going to second it?
Okay. It's a shame we didn't talk about it earlier, I guess. So is there anyone else that would like to speak to Councillor Dorney's motion or offer up any other amendments?
I'd
Councillor
like to
Kavanagh?
speak against. All right. I know you wanted to, unanimous. Just simply for me, as a school teacher, I'm not prepared to sanction children leaving school at times where school is designated.
Last day of term?
Yeah, schools are going right till that day. It's unfortunate that the climate strike isn't in the next 14 days after that. So I'm not prepared to, as a school teacher, endorse children leaving school.
Fair enough. Thank you, John. Anyone else? Councillor Bolton?
I'd like to speak. I mean, I definitely think council should support the motion. I would like us to be allowing staff to attend without loss of pay because the issue is so significant. I don't agree with Councillor Kavanagh about school children not leaving school for this. I think historically there have been all sorts of important issues, humanitarian issues, where school students have taken strike action to oppose various unjust things over many decades, and a lot of our democratic rights and so forth are a result of high school students, as well as other sectors of society, taking strike action, walking out of school to win all sorts of democratic rights. And in reality, you could say stopping any intensification of the climate change, which is already happening. We're already experiencing climate change. Taking action to try and stop the intensification of that is a democratic right of especially young people, because young people born today, what temperature is it going to be in Melbourne or any part of Australia in 2040 or 2050? And, you know, certainly there are parts of Australia that hit over 50 degrees last summer. Luckily not Melbourne, thank goodness for us, but in other parts of Australia there were a couple of places that hit over 50 degrees. So, I mean, there are many other issues, many other aspects you can say about climate change and all of the problems with climate change and natural and these disasters, climate disasters. But I think young people, school students, they're exercising their democratic right in order to try and have the democratic right to a safe climate.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Any other councillors like to speak?
Point of order. It does say in their own time, doesn't it?
Yeah, in their own
Because
time.
in the report it doesn't say in their own time. So
No, it's been amended.
definitely in their own time.
Yes.
It didn't have council staff at all in the report, if you read that.
No, I
too.
know, but it's in their own time.
In their own time, they're not, yeah, oh sorry, I'm out of order. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour?
In their own time, just being moved.
All those in
That's
against? Councillor Tapanos, are you abstaining?
No, I'm supportive.
Okay. All those in favour?
There's a thing called a hand here,
Against? Could I please have a division? All those in favour? Councillors Bolton, Davidson, Dorney, Riley. Bolton, Davidson, Dorney, Riley, Abood, Martin, Tapanos. Against? Kavanagh and Yildiz. Okay, good. Notice of motion 5019, investigate improvement options. Sorry.
Other climate one.
It's because my pages are all messed up. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Notice of motion 4819, support for climate emergency actions. Councillor Sue Bolton.
So this is a motion for council to support 2 further climate emergency actions, in addition to the school strike for climate. So this is a motion for acknowledging council's strong support for the environment and declaration of climate emergency and the need for action, that council recognises and supports the actions by community organisations to build support for urgent action by all levels of government, and declares its public support for 1, the week of action initiated by Extinction Rebellion on 7th of October through council's social media channels; 2, the development of a local Extinction Rebellion Moreland group by offering free use of venues for meetings if required and promotion through council's social media channels; and 3, the 3-day protest organised by Blockade IMARC outside the International Mining and Resources Conference on 28 to 31 October at the Melbourne Convention Centre, by inviting them to advertise the event on council's website as a community event.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Can I just ask a question about 2? Free use of venues for meetings unlimited, or is there any?
I just said if required. So far, I don't think they've required, other than the Coburg Library.
Okay.
It's free for community groups.
Yep. I'm happy to second it.
I'll speak against. So I am putting this motion forward for the same reasons that Councillor Dorney put forward the motion in support of the global climate strike. I think people feel, especially in Australia, that there is a total lack of action by governments in terms of taking climate emergency action. And I know there was a comment made earlier about, people need to see who their allies are, and I think it is true that there are local councils who are taking more action than other levels of government. On the other hand, I think the fact that when there's strong community action, I think that puts pressure on us all, including me. And I think it is important that we all experience that pressure from the community, including myself, because it forces us to really think more deeply about what other actions we can take in terms of dealing with the climate emergency. There are all sorts of ideas out there in the community about what needs to be done. Some things which council's already doing, but no doubt there are other ideas about things which, we're not strong enough. And I think, I think we need, all levels of government need to experience the mobilisation by people who are concerned about the climate crisis, because I think this is what is going to drive, the serious action on climate change. And it was this sort of action which led to Australia pulling out of the Vietnam War. It wouldn't have happened, Australia would not have pulled out of the Vietnam War if it wasn't for community action. And I think it's community action which is driving governments taking the climate crisis seriously. And I think we need to welcome. I think this action by community groups, I think, assists council in taking action on climate change. It assists us in putting our case forward to other levels of government. So I commend it to you.
Councillor Bolton, would it be okay if we write for meetings until 7th of October, and then we can revisit it just so there's an end date at the point 2?
Or to the end of the year?
I'm okay with that, but I just think it needs some kind of end date on it.
Okay, till the end of 2019, and then we can revisit.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I don't need to speak to it.
Can I ask?
Yes.
What are the political parties behind, or political movements behind Extinction Rebellion, and all giving them free access to the town hall breach our policy?
I don't know if there are political. I don't know the answer to that. I think, yeah.
You're right.
Any more than the UCC is. There's a perception. The first meeting of the UCC will, anyway, not.
Can I maybe answer that?
Yep.
Extinction Rebellion has a very clear principle that it is non-political. So probably a lot of the people are not politically aligned. I mean, obviously the issue of climate is a political issue, but it is not, it's certainly not a party political kind of grouping. And in fact, there's some people in the group who are sort of hostile to the idea of politics being involved and see climate as a non-political issue. So I think they're basically focused on trying to get, urgent action on the climate emergency, and yeah, it's against their policy for the group to be aligned with any party.
I mean, does the group promote civil disobedience, and have we had a report or seeking any advice from Victoria Police about the likelihood of violence at this blockade IMARC? Because, I mean, if there is likelihood to be violence or civil disobedience, I don't think it's something that we should be promoting as a council.
Not to my knowledge. There's not that many violent protests that really happened. The last
there was one in.
Yeah, but it was like 4 or 5 years ago. But the Extinction Rebellion demonstration that happened down in Brunswick was as passive as it could have been. And even though there were politicians there who wanted to speak, none of them were allowed to. So I think, I don't think your concerns are valid. But you don't have to support it. Councillor Martin.
Can I speak to the...
Of course.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the debate.
I'd like to bring us back to the debate. I, for one, am really supportive of this motion. I have actually been rather frustrated with Extinction Rebellion. I've reached out a number of times to try and get in touch with the group and actually get involved. And as a councillor who is very active in this space, I'm a member of many different groups wanting to make change on this area, in particular with the experience and knowledge that I believe, John, correct me if I'm wrong, we were the 10th council in the world to declare a climate emergency. I would argue that Moreland has the best policy suite of any local government in this country in regards to taking action on climate. Please, again, somebody feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. And so as a councillor wanting to drive action on our climate emergency, I do find it frustrating when there are local groups that aren't willing to engage with local councillors wanting to assist and drive this. And so I do welcome any meetings or any Extinction Rebellion people to invite your local councillors. I would really enjoy the opportunity to come and speak at one of your events. But I do believe that we have reached a point where the other levels of government just aren't taking this seriously. And I think as a council who recognises the dire situation that we're in, we need to take further action. And I welcome community groups really highlighting this issue to other levels of government and taking action, because the reality of it is that it is our future, and we need to take action, and we need to take action quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Tapanos.
I will speak against it, and in doing so, just highlighting the difference between this resolution and the previous one. For me, I just don't know much about Extinction Rebellion, and a quick Google search would say that the main ethos of these protests is to cause disruption, particularly outside of an international conference, and I feel that that has the potential to turn violent, and I really do urge councillors to be more considerate as a municipality about the movements that we support. And I'm not saying that it's about the principle, it's not. I mean, as Councillor Dale Martin said, this council has a very strong position about climate emergency and sustainability, but that doesn't mean it needs to blindly support every protest that occurs, particularly when there is, in my view, an unknown behind the organisers, the motivations of the organisers, and what may occur at this conference. And I think that we should proceed more carefully and actually not support this and not advertise it, because if something does go wrong, we could be held responsible as a party of someone who's encouraged our residents to attend this, and it might not be a good look if the news reports that night are not turn violent, and we could end up with egg on our face. So I'll urge you to be cautious with it.
Thank you, Councillor Tapanos. Anybody else like to speak? Councillor Kavanagh.
I'm also going to speak against, and I have similar views to Councillor Tapanos. Also, last Friday, the extension, yes, I accept in Sydney Road, that was extremely peaceful and no problem whatsoever. But last Friday in the city, when the organiser was quoted as the Herald Sun of saying, "I'm really pleased that there's a major football game on, because where our aim is to cause as much inconvenience as we possibly can." Now, I don't want to support a group that thinks that. I also think it's incredibly counterproductive. If you're going to inconvenience people, do you think that's going to win people over for your cause? I don't think it is at all. And thirdly, I do not support the blockade in any shape or form. The international, we've talked a lot about rights tonight, about the rights of these people, the rights of those people. Now, the International Mining and Resources Conference, I might totally disagree with them, but they're a legal body. They're running a conference. They're legally entitled to book the convention centre, and I believe they should be allowed to go about their conference without facing a blockade out the front. It's not an illegal activity. Yes, we might disagree with them, but many people I disagree with, but I still allow them to have their say and to have their conference or have their debate or whatever group they are. It seems we only, I don't think we should even be involved in that at all. So that's my view.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Anybody else? Would you like to write a reply?
The debate.
2 minutes.
I think, I think there are many different sort of things that people do in campaigning around issues like climate emergency and so forth. And by this, I'm sort of talking about community groups that are not necessarily political parties.
I think, historically, there has been a current within the movements of mass peaceful protests, non-violent civil disobedience or non-violent direct action as it's described. The old pacifist movement, often used to do things like this in terms of non-violent civil disobedience. I think, supporting these motions doesn't commit council to, say, if some group did come and did something that council was uncomfortable with, I don't think, supporting the notion of a peaceful blockade or a peaceful week of activity, which would include probably a range of things from mass peaceful protests and non-violent direct action, which has been negotiated with the police, because that's one of the things with Extinction Rebellion is part of its ethos is also to have quite extensive liaison with the police, which is why that action in Brunswick was so successful. I think in general the ethos of these groups is totally fine, and I think the key purpose of the groups is non-violent actions, i.e. peaceful actions with involving mass participation.
I'm interested to know if it makes any difference to anybody if we separate the 3 points. Okay, good. That was a quick answer. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Against?
Oh, sorry, excuse me. I'm against. Sorry.
All those in favour?
Excuse me.
It's okay, it's fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Against? 1, 2, 3, 4. Declare that carried.
Can I ask for division, please?
You may indeed. So, all those in favour? Councillor Bolton, Councillor Dorney, Councillor Riley, Councillor Abood, and Councillor Martin. And against? Councillors Davidson, Kavanagh, Tapanos, and Yildiz. Okay, I need an extension of time, please, councillors. Councillor Riley and Councillor Yildiz. So I'll put that to the vote. To all those in favour, declare that carried. So that was Riley and Yildiz, extension of time. Notice of motion 5019, investigate improvement options. Sorry, did I go? What was that? No, who?
Extension of time,
who
Riley
and Yildiz. It's okay. A lot happened in that little period. Notice of motion 5019, investigate improvement options for cycling on the upfield as part of a level crossing removal project. This is a notice of motion that I've submitted. If I have a second, do I speak to it? Councillor Martin? Yes.
Sorry.
And there's an additional pointee that should have been circulated there. Potential for council's co-contribution.
Thank
Yep.
you. Yep.
It's at D, that's right. Yep. Very good. And Councillor Martin, I saw Councillor Martin's hand. This was actually, I hold John Fain responsible for this information because I rang him up on the radio and next thing you know, he said to me, well, would council provide money for rah, rah, rah? And I said, well, I can't really say, that would have to come through the chamber. So somebody straight away said to me, so you'll be submitting a notice of motion? And I was like, well, yes, I will now. But also this whole thing about transport, what's the issue with people riding bicycles? What is the problem? I just don't get it. If there is a cohort of people who don't want to drive one to a car, down the main drag of this busy city. I don't see why that shouldn't be supported. I think that the implications of getting people out of their cars for environmental, financial, and even physical health reasons can't be understated. Certainly from my perspective, it's been of great benefit to me. And I think that we have an obligation, considering the goals of the council plan, talking to Mode Shift and the Moreland Integrated Transport Strategy work, that we need to at least say, okay, we've come up with this report to the LXRP. We think these are some great opportunities and compromises and all of the things. While I welcome the LXRP project, I think that there's been some great missed opportunities. I don't know if it's the way we're communicating with them or not. I don't know if it's, there have been other cities where there have been better outcomes. I don't know whether we didn't do enough pre-work, but we're here, we want to speak, we want to try and feed into the outcomes. We have a huge cohort of people who commute on bicycles through the city, and part of the issue that resonated with me when I was talking to John Fain that day was the fact that quite a lot of conflict and noise is made about dedicated bike lanes on Sydney Road and the impact of traders, and the response to that is generally go and ride on the upfield path. But if there's no investment in the upfield path, how is that a viable alternative? So we need to, as a council, and especially because we have a heap of people that have done a lot of research on this stuff who can feed into this project and report, which will then come back to council, we need to at least investigate what the opportunities are for all of the things, whether it's signalling so that you can still ultimately race the train, which is what people do now, but you'd be just on a cycle of lights so that you could coast down, whether it's a scenario that when you do get to the lights, you can hit a button or you can pass through a sensor and it will change instantly. Like, whatever that looks like, I think that the priority of cars is just unnecessary, and I look forward to hearing what the report turns up. Councillor Martin?
Just to say, I really think we do need to thank the officers throughout this process. The way that they're running the CARG at the moment, the way that they're engaging, really trying to get the best possible outcome for our community. And I think, in some of the questioning that we've seen tonight, there is a perception or a level of distrust from the community. And I truly believe that, there should be scrutiny on council decisions. But I really would welcome people to stop getting their news feed from one line on social media and actually come and sit in the council chamber and go through the 1,500 pages of council reports that we go through, because this council is really committed to getting the best possible outcome on a range of issues for our residents. And I really do think that we get given a bit of a hard time, and our officers in particularly do receive quite a bit of flack, and they do a fantastic job in this city. And I look forward to receiving this report and really adding it to the huge suite of work that we are already undertaking in this city.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Are there any councillors that would like to speak against the motion?
Amendment, but I think I meant to talk to you about it earlier, but it's not contrary to the motion. I'm just wondering if point C, the traffic signals part could be reworded to read traffic signals at intersections that prioritise pedestrians and cyclists, because I think because the motion.
What about we say or? Because it's calling for a report, so we could find out both of those things rather than one or the other.
I guess that's just at the last council meeting I moved a motion which got passed to prioritise, and I feel that this sort of weakens it if we don't. I mean.
Well, I think it would be good to just say minimise delay or prioritise cyclists and pedestrians when crossing, something like that.
Okay, alrighty. And the other thing is just an extra point that this report be shown to the Community Advocacy Reference Group members for comment prior to it coming to a council meeting.
I think that that would happen anyway. But yeah, I have no issue with that at all. Oh, Dale, is that okay with you? You can say no if you like.
Yeah, it's okay. I just I wouldn't want it to slow anything down. It definitely should be going to the CARG. I'm just conscious of timing, but yeah, if it's fine with
Those meetings are happening fortnightly, so
Yeah.
it should be okay.
yeah, that should be cool.
Okay.
Need to contribute to the project.
What? Sorry.
I mean, that inclusion of the co-contribution of funding to increase the likelihood of improvements, not previously.
It's a report. It's just a report.
Okay.
So it will say.
We're going to pay for the valuation.
No, it would say if we were to pay for the valuate, it would cost this much money.
Okay.
You know, it's just getting the information. Yeah. Because at the same time, there might be something much cheaper than, and you can blame Trump fame. And actually another council that did contribute a substantial amount of money for good outcomes as part of the Alex RP project in their city. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Against? And declare that carried. And could it please be recorded as unanimous? Thank you. Notice of motion 5119. And thank you, Councillor Yildiz is happy to second. Which I think is good because diversity is important with these things. Let me just find my notes. Okay.
That's a new principle.
This, right, Lambros?
I'm fine.
Stop talking, please. Okay, so this motion is a response to a letter I got from the Frankston Council, which was sent to many different councils, informing our council that it was pledging $2,000 towards a collaborative advocacy coordinated campaign that would be run by the MAV, and asking us to match that $2,000, which we can provide from the Towards Zero Waste operating project budget, so the money is not really an issue. That would urge the establishment of a container deposit scheme. This is like the trees and the bikes. I just don't understand why we're the only state in Australia that doesn't have a container deposit scheme. I have no idea why. Like, I have 3 sons. They would pick up every single bottle that went past our house in the creek and get paid because they would be getting paid. There would be no bottles in the creek because they're industrious little kids, and that one of them's probably going to be a capitalist. So we would probably employ the others to pick up the bottle. Control. So it's also supporting the Boomerang Alliance with its grassroots campaign, advocating for the container deposit scheme. When it potentially will bring its big bottle to Moreland. So it's just a campaign that it runs through promoting container deposit scheme with this big bottle, and also a letter, which has probably been written before by many people, to the Premier, the Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change, and the state members for Broadmeadows, Pascoe Vale and Brunswick, asking them to promote and support a container deposit scheme. So you're happy with this, Councillor Yildiz? Would you like to speak?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, container deposit legislation in South Australia was introduced in 1975, a few years after you were born, John. 44 years ago, right? It actually was introduced in 1975, but then it was in practice in 1977. In 1979, when I was in South Australia, in Merri-bek, we had ice cream crates connected to our BMXs, and we used to, not ice cream crates, milk crates, and we used to go around and collect as young kids at primary school. 10 cents is what they get that we used to get back then. Sorry, between 5 and 10 cents back then. Today it's gone up to 15 cents. In Italy recently, they brought in the container deposit legislation. They're actually issuing train tickets for free. In Turkey, only a month and a half ago when I was in Turkey, they actually give out, the machines basically providing dog food and cat food. In New South Wales, which I've actually seen them, there are kids lining up after school, and I'm not joking about this. They're giving out iTunes vouchers. I still can't believe this is the only state in the whole country, and I commend you, Councillor Abood, Mayor, because...
Can we get that? Can you say that again? Channel 7? Just to Channel 7.
Do that, but I really
Channel 7. I'm ringing Queensland about that
I'm-
comment.
I'm really passionate about this, and it's not something that's just happened in the last few months. I've been advocating for this for the last probably good 10, 15 years, because I'm gobsmacked that our government and our members of parliament can't see what other states... I mean, South Australia, let's be honest, is a few decades behind Victoria in many things. I'm an ex-South Australian.
Defamation.
I have to say, this is something that the South Australian government should be really proud of, because it was, in fact, South Australia that introduced this. Excuse the joke before, but I do honestly have family and friends still there, but I do, in fact, acknowledge the great work they're doing. Just some key things in here. You just said, Councillor Abood, there is a recycling crisis in Victoria. If anything, now's the time to introduce this. We should be doubling that, if not making that $2,000 figure to $5,000 to be known as, or to be recognised as champions in this space. Because we have for years had similar motions like this. It hasn't really got anywhere, and it's fallen on deaf ears. Our local members of parliament need to take this seriously, and they need to be leaders in this space, and they haven't been. It provides an incentive to consumers to recycle. You just mentioned before about your kids. There are hundreds of kids that would do this after school. I'm going to wrap it up. I can't believe we haven't, in fact, done this earlier. I can't move an amendment, but I'd love for Councillor Tapanos to move an amendment to point 2 and increase that to $5,000. I know it's not a lot of money, but it'll send a very clear message to all the other councils that we need to move on this, and let's put our money where our mouth is.
Just want to make a correction there. The member for Brunswick has been campaigning on this tirelessly.
Excluding Dr. Timmery.
Thank you. Councillor Tapanos, did you want to put an amendment?
Please.
I don't have an issue with an increase in the fee, but I do question whether the money should instead go to Boomerang Alliance. I mean, we already pay an affiliation fee to the MAV to advocate a lot on behalf of the sector. So I'm just wondering whether it's the right body. I'm happy to increase it to 5. I pose that question. If you think we should stick with the MAV, happy to do that.
Councillor Martin?
I'd be more than happy to recommend or move an amendment that says 3,000 goes to Boomerang Alliance and 2,000 to MAV, if that is amenable to...
Yeah, it's so amenable. I love it. I wish it was my
I'm also
idea.
wanting to...
Please speak.
So...
Do we get a second? That was accepted. Yeah.
That was accepted by both.
Thank you.
We're just getting some detail for our governance, who are keeping up with us beautifully, as always.
So I just wanted to start by saying thank you and keep up the fantastic work. Groups like Boomerang Alliance, Cash for Containers Victoria, Zero Waste Victoria, all of these groups that are doing such fantastic work in advocating for a Cash for Containers scheme in Victoria. I think a couple of points that it is really key is that the difference between Victoria and the rest of the country is that we do not have waste diversion targets at a state level, and as a result, there is no additional incentive to recycle. This state government is obsessed with the idea of burning things. And as a council, and I've spent a couple of years now looking into this in depth, we need to look at source separation and actually treating the end product as a resource and not as a waste stream. And, you know, with this continual push to burn everything, it's only going to push our recycling rate lower and it's only going to end up costing the future residents who will be paying for these giant incinerators into the future. It'll be costing them an arm and a leg. Yet we're seeing it across over in Europe. They are closing these things down and they are deciding to source, separate and recycle. This scheme is perfect because it benefits council financially. It assists council in not only having less recycling to pick up, but it also reduces the amount of money that we spend on cleaning our creeks and litter. It is an absolute no-brainer in a rate-capped environment that this scheme would benefit council greatly. And I just hope that in the work that the state is doing currently, that they decide that source separation is key and not to go down the path of burning everything.
Thank you, Councillor Martin.
I'll just say a couple of words as well. I'm taken on from Councillor Yilder's almost global experience there. I was, when I was on leave in Berlin for a few days, and lo and behold, on my first night there, I was approached by an elderly gentleman, and I thought to myself, oh no, he's going to ask me for money and I don't know how to speak German. And what he actually wanted was the bottle of Coke that I had that I'd consumed. And I noticed throughout my time walking around in the city, not only were there adequate recycling bins right across the city, but there were a whole range of people from all ages actually collecting plastic bottles. And it created such an incentive, and I just saw it with my own eyes, so obvious, that kids after school would just go with a bag and just collect as much as they can find, and it worked. So I've got no doubt that it works. All the evidence says it works. Why haven't we done it? That's a good question. Hopefully this advocacy can start showing our politicians that this is something that they need to prioritise.
Do you know anyone in the Labor Party? Anyone else like to speak to the motion? Okay, let's put it to the vote. All those in favour? Can I have that declared unanimous? Thank you. Councillor Kavanagh, notice of motion 5219.
This is just a call for a report regarding, you remember last month's decision, and if the trial was to go ahead, to get a report to see how much it would cost.
I'm happy to support this for you.
Car parks in the area.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it.
Very good. Put it to the vote. Oh, did anyone want to speak against it? No. All the hands in there. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour. Declare that carried.
Unanimous?
Yes, unanimously. Thank you. Okay, 10. That concludes our notices of motion. Councillor Tapanos, please be quiet. Notice of rescission, unless you have a notice of rescission to talk about? No? Or a foreshadowed item? Nothing?
I have a foreshadowed item. Do you mind if I just speak?
No, I want you to.
Okay,
I
thank
want
you
you
very
to.
much. I'll bring it up at the next council meeting, if I can, as a nom. The ATBC, the Australian Turkish Business Council, have for years utilised our concert hall for meetings. I'll be moving a notice of motion at the next meeting, so at the next council meeting, to allow them to use concert hall on the Thursday day after the council meeting. No resources necessary. All they really need is a PowerPoint projector and the room. About 30 to 40 people will be in attendance, and most of those people will come from the City of Moreland. Their actually addresses here. They're in the City of Moreland. I'm hoping that we would waive the 2 hours fee to allow them to have their meeting in the concert hall.
We'll look forward to seeing that notice of
Can I
motion.
just point out to Councillor Hill, they could get the hall, but they won't be able to get the equipment.
We'll have the debate.
It's not a debate, it's just a point of...
I've spoken to the acting CEO about this, and also a number of other staff. They can use the PowerPoint projector. It doesn't mean they can't.
Right, okay.
It's a PowerPoint. That's all they use.
Use the overhead, you've got to bring your own laptop.
They've got their own equipment.
Okay, thank you.
Good to hear that.
Urgent business? No urgent business this evening. Won't be long, Councillor Tapanos, hang in there. Confidential business? There are no confidential reports, so we don't need to close the meeting to the public, except that the meeting has finished. So I would now please like to have, I'd like to declare the meeting closed.
Well done.
At 10:45.